If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Pain. Intense pain. In a burst of excruciating pain, Syd Castell woke up. Where am I? Syd felt waves of severe pain all over his body, and it seemed he was currently in a cell. At that moment, a voice of reprimand came from the iron bars ahead. Prisoner 37, get up, stop playing dead. With a thud, a large foot kicked over, causing Syd immense pain. Disgusting mutant. Clang, a tray faintly smelling of spoilage, along with a bowl of thin soup, was thrown on the ground. Syd stared blankly at the spit floating on the soup and looked up at the initiator. He saw a prison guard in a black uniform, looking at him with a face full of disgust and malice, as if he were looking at trash, utterly repulsive. Damn it, what are you looking at? Eat it up. Gil, with a sneer at the corner of his mouth, glanced at the mutant slumped against the wall, turned around comfortably, and left the place. Syd, out of breath with anger, then became puzzled. A mutant. Just as the thought emerged, a flood of unfamiliar memories surged into his mind. Damn. While holding his head, Syd sorted through the memories, quickly making sense of everything. Did I just cross over, into the Marvel world, and even into the body of a mutant? Syd found it hard to believe. After dozing off for a short while reading a novel last night, he had crossed over? And not just crossed over, but into the body of a mutant? Being a mutant was not unfamiliar to him. It was scientifically a genetic mutation, an awakening of a gene known as the X gene, granting him superpowers. If it were a usual day, having superpowers would have thrilled Syd, but now, he could not smile at all. Because he was not only a mutant but also one who had been captured due to his exposed identity. And his pain was due to various experiments. Thinking of mutants, Syd suddenly understood why that man had treated him that way. In the eyes of ordinary people, mutants are freaks, monsters, they are both feared and shunned, and mutants are even lower on the discrimination scale than all races. For them, mutants are not human and shouldn't even have human rights. Although he understood, thinking of that person's actions earlier made Syd wish he could kill him. I'll remember you, just wait. After muttering a curse, he had to face his current plight. Feeling the pain all over his body due to the experiments, Syd couldn't help but frown. Right. My mutant ability. His eyes brightened, and a glimmer of hope emerged. Recalling the memories, he soon knew his own mutant abilities. Looking up at the small window high in the cell, watching some golden sunlight filter in, he couldn't help but reach out his hand. As soon as his palm touched the sunlight, Syd felt a warm sensation spreading throughout his body, slightly alleviating the pain. In his unseen perspective, his blue irises even turned golden. Is this my mutant ability? Absorbing sunlight to replenish my energy, and even relying on sunlight for sustenance instead of food. Thinking of this, Syd's face fell. This ability only made his body feel better and healed his wounds faster, it was practically useless. No wonder I'm just a Delta level, a second-class mutant. Recalling the memories in his mind, he felt indignant. With such weak mutant abilities, how was he to escape this prison? Was he to stay here forever, eventually being dissected and dying on an operating table? Syd squatted on the ground, his eyes reddening, his emotions violently fluctuating. He clenched his fists, his breathing rapid. It was unclear if it was his intense emotions or something else, but suddenly a strong wave of energy erupted from him. For a moment, Syd seemed to hear a cold, emotionless voice by his ear. Your emotions have caused a violent fluctuation. It seems you've awakened something. What's this voice? Could it be a system? Before Syd could feel elated, a series of beeping alarms came from his neck, along with the sound of electricity, and he immediately collapsed on the ground. Feeling the pain from his neck, Syd glared at the collar hanging there. A mutant controller. A device used to control mutants and limit their abilities. This collar was like a dog collar, not only restraining him but also binding his mutant abilities. Even his non-offensive mutant abilities did not escape the constraints of this collar. Syd felt as if his dignity had been trampled. Cough, cough. The injuries recurred, and he couldn't help coughing a few times, his palm bloody. Enduring the intense pain in his body, at that moment, his mind was filled with a desire to destroy the research base. It took him a while to calm down, and he had a chance to find out what exactly he had awakened. System. Panel. Syd tried calling out for the system in his mind, there was no response, but when he called for the panel, a yellow, Ethereal panel appeared before his eyes. Name, Syd Castell. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 83 days. Mutant abilities, mimicry, energy absorption. Current mimic, Orochi, title, Sun God, will of the earth. Unlock progress, 1%. Abilities, unlocked. Energy points, 0. Looking at the panel before him, Syd was stunned. His attention was immediately drawn to the displayed remaining lifespan. 83 days? Was it because of those experiments? Syd's expression darkened, his heart filling with even more loathing for the research base. Like grasping for a lifeline, he quickly turned his gaze to the mutant abilities section. Mimicry. Energy absorption. Energy absorption was easy to understand, Syd quickly associated it with absorbing light energy. As for mimicry, when did I gain such a mutant ability? Could it be what I just awakened? Syd was first shocked, then his heartbeat quickened. He immediately shifted his gaze downward, focusing on the mimic object. Mimicry, mimicry. I see. Syd muttered to himself. Orochi. He was familiar with the name, which appeared to be the final boss of a certain King of Fighters video game. He was called the Will of the Earth, once allowing humanity to coexist harmoniously as part of nature, but when humanity detached from nature, he grew to despise them. In short, as humanity began to damage the environment, Orochi, as the Will of the Earth, wanted to cleanse the humans who had separated from nature, thus becoming the final boss. As for why he was called the Sun God, it was because in the game, he could use a move called Sunshine, which appeared to harness the power of the sun to cause widespread damage. Chapter 2. How do I increase this unlock progress? And these energy points? As Syd pondered with a frown, a voice sounded in his ear. Light energy +1. Syd was startled and subconsciously looked at the panel, noticing that the energy point had increased to 1. From absorbing sunlight with energy absorption. Syd mused in surprise. But, how do I use these energy points? He began to experiment. Soon, he realized that by focusing his attention on the unlock progress and using his mind, he could spend energy points to increase it. Unfortunately, even after investing 1 energy point, the progress didn't budge. Subconsciously, Syd moved into the sunlight, trying to absorb more. Promptly, a series of notifications sounded. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. Syd comfortably absorbed the sunlight. However, not half an hour later, familiar footsteps sounded nearby. The white man named Gil walked to the neighboring cell, clanged the door open, and barked, "Scum, it's time for you to get some air, hurry up and get out." Then, he quickly reached Syd's cell. With a clang, he opened the door, first glancing at the untouched utensils, then at the young man squatting in the sunlight, his disgust growing. Ungrateful. With a cold snort and a mocking curl of his lips, he turned and left. He wanted to see how long this freak of a boy could last, there would come a time when he would eat. Watching his retreating figure, Syd's face remained hidden in the shadows, his expression unclear. Almost there. Unlock progress 4%. After spending half an hour's worth of light energy, the unlock progress startlingly reached 4%, and he had a feeling that gaining new abilities was imminent. Syd's eyes gleamed with anticipation. The abilities of the Sun God, the Will of the Earth, he was indeed looking forward to it. With an expressionless face, he stood up, walked out of the cell, and headed down the corridor towards the distant playground. Along the way, he saw some ordinary prisoners and fellow mutants wearing blue prison uniforms and neck collars restricting their powers. Syd couldn't help but take a closer look, then fell into deep thought. Among these mutants, some were even weaker than him, classified as the lowest tier of level 1 mutants. Weak abilities aside, some even had significant flaws, they lacked the appearance of normal humans, deformed yet without useful powers. Class 2 mutants, on the other hand, were much better, although their mutant abilities were still weak, they looked more like normal humans, with most abilities being supportive, like his previous self. Phantom Cat, with the ability to walk through walls, was one of them. Class 3 included individuals like Wolverine. Class 4 mutants would include Magneto and Professor X. I just don't know if this is the movie universe or the comic universe, if it's the comics. Syd shivered. Thinking about it, he couldn't help but think of Class 5 mutants. Class 5 mutants, especially Omega mutants, are kind of outrageous. It seems Omega mutants have infinite potential, capable of many things that defy physical phenomena. Simply put, they possess abilities that are outrageously unscientific. Thinking about it, Syd couldn't help but sigh. I really wonder what an Omega mutant is like, how outrageous they can be. I'd like to see that if I get the chance. After recalling these details about mutants, his gaze returned to his fellow mutants. Watching their current state, they looked like dogs locked in cages, both pitiful and sad. But, am I not the same? Syd paused briefly, then laughed coldly. Soon. After a while, he emerged from the corridor. Sunlight hit him directly, enveloping his entire body. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. The incessant reminder kept sounding, Syd's heart beating a bit faster. At that moment, a voice called out nearby, breaking his immersion. Hey, Syd, heard you tried to escape a few days ago. Syd turned to see a freckled white young man approaching, his face full of curiosity. After sizing him up for a moment, the freckled youth asked, Did they drag you off for experiments again these past few days? Are you okay, you? Syd shook his head. Before he could speak, the white youth continued, Man, I've told you, there's no escaping from here. Even if you do get out, with this thing on our necks, where could we possibly hide? At that moment, jeering from a few prisoners carried over. Exactly, it's stupid to even try escaping. Got caught and punished, right? You're right, once you're in this place, there's no getting out. Stop dreaming. We can't even use our powers, if we could escape, I'd. Syd ignored the taunts around him, his focus now on the unlock progress. In just a few minutes, the progress had reached 5%. And as the progress hit 5%, a notification immediately sounded. Ability, Dark Particles, unlocked. Syd quickly called up the panel in his mind and checked it immediately. Ability, Dark Particles, 0/100, Level 1. As he focused on the Dark Particles ability, detailed information about it immediately appeared in his mind. The next second, he was surprised. This ability involves space? Creating a black hole-like distortion with the power of the void that launches forward. Anything in its path seems to vanish, meaning the target must withstand the devouring and cutting of space, or they will undoubtedly perish. This is essentially an attack that can't be blocked, only avoided. Wasn't it this exaggerated in the game? Syd couldn't help but be shocked. And this was only level 1. It's just unclear whether it needs energy points to upgrade, or practice. Thinking this, he couldn't help but want to test it, but... Glancing at the people nearby and the guards and cameras monitoring the area in the distance, he restrained the urge for now. It won't be long now, perhaps tonight or tomorrow night, I should be able to escape this hellish place. He couldn't stand being here a moment longer. Syd's eyes were filled with expectation. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. As Syd diligently collected light energy, aiming to continue awakening new abilities, in a distant luxurious school, an old and a young man were conversing with serious expressions. Professor, you said you sensed an immense X-energy source similar to Jean's. Scott Summers, clad in black and shocked, inquired. Professor X nodded gravely. Recalling the brief but immense energy source he had sensed earlier in the Cerebro room, even now he couldn't help feeling alarmed. Scott, we must find that child quickly. Besides Jean, I've never seen anyone with such immense power. That child might be an Omega-level mutant. As he spoke, Professor X's tone became urgent, we must find him quickly and guide him to control his power, otherwise if that child loses control, it could cause an irreparable disaster. Scott was profoundly shocked, no one knew Jean's power better than he did, and now the professor was telling him that a mutant might possess that kind of power. His instinct was disbelief, thinking the professor might have sensed it wrong, yet he didn't want to outright contradict him. Hesitating for a moment, Scott nodded, his brow furrowed, but Professor, you need to give me an exact location, right? Professor X shook his head regretfully at this. That child is special, I can no longer sense him. Scott, go to the location I mentioned and look carefully. Chapter 3. As the sun slowly set, the sky grew dim. Light energy +1. Inside the prison cell. Hearing the last notification sound, Syd opened his eyes with regret. The sun has set already? I haven't absorbed enough yet. I wonder if moonlight can be converted, he muttered to himself. That was something he could verify later. For now, Syd looked at the energy points displayed on the panel, feeling a surge of joy. He should have enough energy points to unlock the next ability. However, he didn't rush to acquire a new ability but instead pondered the characteristics of the mimicry mutant ability. I wonder if the Orochi I'm mimicking is the one from the game or from the lore, he thought. If it was the game version, aside from the dark particles he had already obtained, there might also be abilities like spatial transfer, rebound shield, soul extraction, divine finger, spiritual light column, sunlight irradiation. Maybe even levitation? Different versions had different skills, and Syd could only remember these more prominent ones. The lore version was more terrifying. As the will of the earth, it would have many abilities, but unfortunately, Syd only remembered a few. For instance, projecting thoughts to communicate with others, reading minds freely, and manipulating the power of the void, among others. It's unclear what exactly my mimicry is based on, Syd murmured to himself. Moreover, he wondered why he was mimicking Orochi and not some other being. Could it be based on my thoughts and memories? Syd pondered. Maybe it's also related to me absorbing sunlight at the time. After all, Orochi had the title of Sun God, and his ultimate move, sunlight irradiation, seemed related to sunlight. So, he suspected that the mimic target might be drawn from his thoughts and memories. Even the abilities of the mimic target could be influenced by his impressions. After all, he had never seen the so-called Orochi and didn't know much about it. Who knows what powers it had and the principles behind those techniques? Impressions, supplemented by imagination, and based on reality? Damn, if you think about it, isn't this mimicry mutant ability a bit too subjective and outrageous? It was as if the concept of absurdity opened the door for more absurdity. Syd was somewhat astonished by this thought. Maybe I'll understand better once the unlock progress reaches 100%. After thinking this through, he became curious about who his next mimic target would be. Just as he thought this, he sensed a disturbance in his mutant abilities. In a haze, he seemed to see a woman enveloped in red energy, dressed in red, though her face was unclear. A name then appeared in his mind. Scarlet Witch, Wanda. As soon as the name surfaced, he snapped back to reality. My God, is it her? Thinking of this name, he felt a mix of surprise and excitement. This character was a well-known power wielder in the Marvel Universe, possessing reality-altering chaos magic. Not only was she an Omega-level mutant, but she also had formidable power. In the comics, a mere outburst of her abilities erased nearly all mutants with a single sentence. Even in the movie and TV show universe, she had altered an entire town. To put it simply, if she disliked reality, she would create a world of her own, forcibly altering everything in a town to fit her desires. Even her deceased lover, Vision, was conjured by her alterations, a truly terrifying feat. And, with her powerful chaos magic, she even turned Doctor Strange 2 into Wanda's quest for relatives, reducing Doctor Strange to a mere supporting role. The next mimic target is her, which means I might also possess chaos magic. Just thinking about it made Syd's heart race. Chaos magic, an Omega-level power. If he possessed it, wouldn't he be unstoppable? Unfortunately. Sigh, I need to fully unlock Orochi first before I can mimic Scarlet Witch. Syd was impatient but had no choice, the feeling from his powers told him he must first complete mimicking Orochi before he could mimic the Scarlet Witch. But it won't be long now. Given the current unlock progress, it shouldn't take much longer. Syd was somewhat expectant, thinking, and Orochi's abilities are not bad either. Just the spatial transfer alone would let me teleport out of this place, not to mention the others. Thinking this, he was excited about the upcoming unlocks. The next second, he opened the panel and spent all his energy points. Immediately, a notification sounded. Ability, Rebound Shield, unlocked. The panel flashed, and new data appeared. Name, Syd Castell. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 83 days. Mutant abilities, Mimicry, Energy Absorption. Current mimic target, Orochi, Title, Sun God, Will of the Earth, Unlock Progress 23%. Abilities, Dark Particles, 0/100, Level 1, Rebound Shield, 0/100, Level 1, Unlocked. Energy Points, 0. Syd frowned slightly, noticing that the unlock progress consumed more energy points than before, but he didn't dwell on it, focusing instead on the newly unlocked ability. Rebound Shield. He was somewhat disappointed. After a while, he consoled himself, well, the rebound shield isn't bad. It seems to block and rebound some energy attacks and physical attacks. As for its effectiveness in actual combat, he would have to test it to know. Speaking of real combat, Syd looked around, and finding no cameras, he entertained the idea of trying it out. He squatted next to the bed and extended his right palm. Dark Particles Experience +1. Ability, Dark Particles, 1/100, Level 1. Along with a notification sound, a sesame-sized blue spatial particle appeared at his fingertip. Then, the spatial particle repelled the surrounding space, instantly creating a finger-thick black distortion. With a whoosh, the solid concrete floor was devoured, leaving a deep, small hole. Syd was shocked by the destructive power, then couldn't help but complain, true to its level 1 status, the range is pitifully small, you'd think that hole was made by a gunshot. Suddenly, a severe pain in his neck intensified, abruptly halting his plans to continue using his powers. Ah! Holding the beeping mutant controller on his neck, Syd's forehead vein throbbed. It took him a while to recover. Now, he frowned deeply, staring gravely at the mutant controller on his neck. With this thing on, not to mention practicing his abilities, even using them a few more times might draw the attention of the surveillance staff. Syd frowned, it looks like I need to escape soon. After thinking for a while, he devised a plan for his escape. The next ability unlock was almost there, either 25% or 30%, by tomorrow night, he should be ready to make his break. Chapter 4. Syd knew it was risky to forcefully deploy the dark particles to destroy the mutant controller in an instant while the device's reaction was slow, then escape along the route he had observed during the day. This could be dangerous, possibly resulting in capture, punishment, experimentation, and eventual death. He had considered laying low for a while, gathering strength before destroying the research facility. But staying could mean dying even sooner. He felt an imminent second experiment looming, which would put his body. With only 83 days left of his lifespan displayed on the panel, Syd's expression darkened. Dying by staying or possibly surviving by escaping, the choice was obvious, even to a fool. At that moment, he noticed something that made him pause. Just now, using dark particles had slightly replenished his energy, something he hadn't observed without actively consuming energy before. Could it be from absorbing moonlight? Syd speculated. It seemed moonlight could indeed be absorbed, providing another source of energy points. With this thought, he shifted his position to expose himself more directly to the moonlight. After nearly half an hour without hearing any light energy +1 notifications, but feeling his internal energy continuously recovering, he mused, it seems I can't collect light energy until my internal energy is fully replenished. Does the light energy prioritize my bodily needs first? Additionally, he noticed a peculiar thing. The total amount of light energy he could store seemed to have surpassed the previous limit. He guessed this was due to unlocking 2 new abilities, Dark Particles and Rebound Shield. Previously, using Dark Particles consumed about 1/10 of his internal energy, meaning he could use the ability up to 10 times. He had worried about running out of energy for using his abilities, but that concern seemed unnecessary now. As more abilities unlocked, the energy stored in his body would increase, allowing for more frequent use. With everything figured out, despite the pain, Syd forcibly moved his bed into a position where the moonlight could reach him and lay down to rest. Wonder what ability I'll unlock tomorrow. With thoughts of anticipation and curiosity, he ignored the noise from other cells and quickly fell asleep. The next day, Syd was woken by a series of notifications as the sun rose. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. He opened his eyes and focused on the panel. Name, Syd Castell. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 82 days. Mutant abilities, Mimicry, Energy Absorption. Current mimic target, Orochi, Title, Sun God, Will of the Earth. Unlock progress 23%. Abilities, Dark Particles, 1/100, Level 1, Rebound Shield, 0/100, Level 1, unlocked. Energy points, 44. Seeing the number of energy points, Syd wasn't surprised. The effects of moonlight were weak, and considering the movement of the moon, absorbing this much was already fortunate. He first tried to add energy points to the experience bar of dark particles, but was disappointed when nothing happened. It seems that's not possible. Feeling a bit regretful, he then focused on the unlock progress. As the energy points reset to 0, the progress bar moved to 24%. After a slight disappointment, he continued to wait. Time passed. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. Light energy +1. After absorbing energy for a while, just as he was losing track of time, a familiar set of footsteps approached. With a clang, a tray emitting a stale smell and a bowl of soup with a faint odor were placed on the ground. Frowning at the soup, his gaze turned indifferent towards the white man, Gil, who smirked mockingly at him and leisurely turned away. Syd held back for a moment, nearly releasing a dark particle to send the man away. Soon, he murmured to himself. Shortly after, as the energy points reset to 0, the unlock progress suddenly jumped. Unlock progress 26%. A notification sound followed. Ability, Spatial Transfer, unlocked. Hearing the notification, Syd's mood lifted remarkably. Spatial Transfer, finally. With this ability, he felt more confident about his planned escape. If he hadn't experimented with dark particles, knowing how pitifully weak level 1 abilities were, he might have wished to teleport directly outside the facility right then. After sensing he could only teleport about 2 meters, he felt it was somewhat underwhelming. Still, better to have it than not. It'll be useful for passing through walls and dodging attacks. Soon, he noticed the upper limit of his stored light energy had increased slightly, enough for about 13 uses of dark particles. That should be enough. Syd looked forward to the night's escape. Time quickly passed. As Syd absorbed light energy, he took the opportunity during yard time to check the escape route. Soon, it was 7 p.m., and the unlock progress had reached 34%. As he planned to escape between 11 p.m. and midnight, an unexpected event occurred. The familiar footsteps sounded again. It was Gil. What was this man doing here? Watching Gil prepare to open the cell door, Syd frowned. Come out, we're going to the lab. Gil's gaze was filled with malice and a hint of pity, as if looking at something pitiful. Syd's heart sank, sensing what was coming. This familiar procedure meant they were probably planning to take his life. Taking a deep breath, he restrained his urge to react. Not yet, he couldn't make a move now. Quickly, he devised a plan. The lab was closer to the main exit, and he could potentially take out the experimenters and seize some keycards. He had noticed during the day that several doors required a card to open. Although he now had spatial transfer, he needed to conserve as much energy as possible, not knowing what might come next. Deciding, he pretended to comply and walked out of the cell, then consciously towards the lab. Watching his compliance, Gil sneered even more, looking down on the freak before him. Indeed, mutants were nothing but trash. After passing through several doors, they arrived at the experimental area. Chapter 5. As soon as he arrived, Syd Castell's gaze was drawn to a scene within a glass partition not far away. A mutant, neck encircled by a control collar, was strapped to an operating table, undergoing a gruesome procedure. Organs were being removed, one by one. Seeing this, Syd's face darkened. Noticing his reaction, Gil, with an indifferent face, scoffed, "That one's about to die. This is just recycling waste." He then turned his malicious gaze on Syd. "Don't worry, you'll soon be like him. He won't be alone, you'll join him." Ha ha! Gil laughed heartily, his voice filled with a brutal delight, showing his deep hatred for mutants. Just then, footsteps approached, and a group of researchers in white coats walked over. The lead middle-aged researcher examined Syd, noting his dark brown hair, pale complexion, and striking blue eyes. "Is this subject 37? He asked blandly, glancing down at a stack of papers in his hand. "Yes, it's this guy," Gil confirmed from behind Syd, then suddenly pushed him towards the researchers. Unexpectedly, the supposed docile mutant dodged his hand. Daring to dodge. Surprised and irritated, Gil reached out to grab Syd, who evaded again. The lead researcher, momentarily disgusted, frowned slightly. "Subject 37, what are you trying to do? I advise you not to resist, or else." He didn't believe the youth wearing the mutant controller could do much, but such defiance was a hassle and a waste of his experimental time. "Kid, you're in for it now." Gil sneered viciously, his eyes flashing cruelly, ready to teach this defiant mutant a harsh lesson. The nearby researchers all looked on eagerly, they were used to seeing such spectacles. Mutants always seemed to struggle futilely in the end. They expected no different this time, all watching with anticipation. But before they could see Gil overpower the youth, the seemingly docile young man calmly stated, "You're the ones who will suffer." What? Before anyone could react, Syd swiftly raised his right hand and aimed precisely at the core of the mutant controller. Dark particle experience +1. A precise stream of dark particles shot from his finger, devouring the core of the mutant controller amidst the shocked expressions of the onlookers. With a squelch, the adjacent metal wall was punctured, and the mutant controller was torn off. What? Oh, my god! Shock and then panic filled Gil and the others. Stop! What are you doing? Both Gil and the middle-aged researcher were no longer composed, their faces filled with panic. "I'm going to make you experience death, you scum!" Filled with murderous intent, Syd first pointed at Gil, then at the researcher. Dark particle experience +1. Dark particle experience +1. 2 streams of black particles shot out with a speed beyond human reaction, hitting both targets in succession. "Ah!" Screams echoed as the burly white man, Gil, clutched his pierced chest, his face a mix of panic and horror. Then more screams, another particle struck both the middle-aged researcher and another person behind him. Screams filled the air, and the remaining 3 researchers scrambled to escape, the experimental area quickly descending into chaos. "It's impossible, how can you have such mutant abilities?" Gil's face was covered in terror and confusion, and the researcher on the ground shared his disbelief. They remembered Subject 37 as a useless mutant, only capable of absorbing sunlight. When did he acquire the ability to emit high-energy beams? As another aimed at his head, Gil stammered in terror, "Don't do it." Syd stepped on his face, grinding down, and asked with a smirk, "Weren't you acting tough before?" "I..." Gil was furious, teeth clenched in hatred but forced to beg, "Don't kill." Before he could finish his plea, the black particle wave hit his head. Dark particle experience +1. With a squelch, the large man was instantly killed, his nostrils oozing vile fluid. Syd felt a surge of relief from his depression, but there was no time to dwell on it. He needed to escape quickly. He ran over to the fallen middle-aged researcher and began searching him. "What are you doing?" Yasin exclaimed in terror. Syd ignored him, quickly taking his ID card, then paused. A familiar notification sounded in his ear. "You notice several documents scattered on the ground, seeming to contain some information about you." Glancing briefly, he was shocked by what he saw. Subject 37, a failed genetic experiment using genes from Magneto, Max Eisenhardt, and Professor X, Charles Francis Xavier, delivered to a foster home years ago. Reading the information, even Syd couldn't hide his shock. What did this mean? Was he a product of genetic manipulation using genes from Magneto and Professor X? In some sense, could he be considered a child of Magneto and Professor X? Syd was utterly stunned, overwhelmed by the revelation. Is this some sort of incredible Marvel technology? With no time to dwell on the shock, as alarms blared throughout the facility, he quickly grabbed the ID card and the papers and ran towards the metal exit. As for the middle-aged researcher and the other injured researcher lying on the ground, he did not continue his assault. The wounds inflicted by his dark particles were severe, not mere gunshot wounds, but actual disappearances of flesh. The ongoing blood loss and missing organs were enough to ensure they would suffer a slow, painful death. Chapter 6. At this moment, Syd's internal energy was only sufficient to fire 9 more dark particles. If he continued to use them, he might run out of energy altogether. Moreover, if it hadn't been his first time trying dark particles, concerned about missing his target, he would not have aimed at their chests but directly at their heads and hearts, which would have saved energy. Reflecting on this, he sighed, "I still have too little energy inside me." He picked up the middle-aged researcher's ID card and swiped it at the metal door's card reader. With a beep, the door automatically opened. Fortunately, there was no iris scan or similar security feature, or he would have been in trouble. He dashed out, running toward the next metal door. As he made his escape, the entire facility erupted into chaos. The piercing sound of alarms echoed throughout, alerting staff and inmates alike that someone was attempting to escape. "Quick, quick! Teams ready, catch him!" Under the orders of the facility's leadership, armed personnel sprung into action. Footsteps echoed in the corridors, with some running towards Syd's direction and others stationed at exits, waiting to catch him. Inmates in their cells were dumbfounded, peeking through the bars to see who was escaping. Who is it this time? Didn't someone just try to escape a few days ago? Haven't they learned their lesson yet, idiot? Ah! There were expressions of surprise, ridicule, and sighs. I wonder who is foolish enough to think about escaping. The freckled youth who had spoken with Syd during the day now recalled a familiar figure. Is it him? No, it can't be him. That guy just tried to escape a few days ago, and his injuries haven't even healed yet. We'll know by tomorrow. Ha ha ha, right, then we can mock that person a bit. As the inmates whispered among themselves, Syd was already nearing the second door. Some pursuers caught up. Stop, don't move, or we'll shoot. Put your hands up. 5 armed guards with rifles approached him, their dark muzzles pointed at him. Syd ignored them, knowing these people wouldn't easily shoot since as a test subject, he was more valuable alive. Many experiments required him to be alive to be effective, even if they ended in death, those were valuable records. Taking advantage of their hesitation, Syd swiped his ID card at the reader. He also kept an eye on the guards, ready to use rebound shield or spatial transfer to dodge if they made a move to shoot. Fortunately, they didn't choose to fire, seeming to wait for others to join them for a sure capture. Syd kept watch while running towards the final exit. Rapid footsteps and clamor filled the corridors. As he approached the facility's main gate, his pace slowed down because he found dozens of armed personnel waiting for him. They looked amused, holding their guns aimed at him. Faced with their encirclement and seeing an unobstructed exit, Syd was puzzled and approached cautiously. He swiped his card, but to no effect a voice announced a verification error. He now understood why they hadn't stopped him from getting close. They were overly confident. Seeing his actions, the amusement on the faces of the surrounding armed personnel intensified, and some even laughed out loud. Captain Kenny stepped forward and shouted, "Don't try to resist, this is a specially made metal door, you can't open it." He paused, then added, "Mutant freak, don't even try to use your powers. The moment you make a move, we'll turn you into a sieve." His tone was condescending, as if to say that having mutant powers was irrelevant against their greater numbers and firepower. Watching the mockery on their faces, Syd mockingly smiled back and quietly said, "Goodbye. Spatial transfer experience +1. Amidst disbelieving stares, his figure flickered and vanished from the spot. "This is impossible." Captain Kenny's smile froze, and he shouted angrily. The others were stunned, unable to believe what they had seen. Had the fugitive just disappeared? What kind of mutant power was that? Their faces filled with confusion. Previously, the briefings in their earpieces hadn't mentioned such a power. As they stood incredulous, Captain Kenny grabbed a rifle and fired wildly into the empty space. Bang, bang, bang. After a while, confirming there was no sound of bullets hitting flesh, Captain Kenny realized, "Open the gate, the kid has gotten out. He can't have gone far, hurry." While they scrambled, Syd was already running towards a nearby road outside the facility. Panting. With unhealed injuries and long periods without exercise, his heart pounded, and he began to tire. As he ran, his eyes brightened when he spotted 2 researchers near some parked vehicles. Seeing him approach, the researchers' faces changed, and they turned to run. Before they could get far, a dark particle shot towards them. Dark particle experience +1. In an instant, one researcher fell to the ground clutching his stomach in agony. "Run again, and I'll aim for your head next." As Syd warned the other fleeing man, feeling the energy for only 7 more abilities left in him, he frowned slightly. Hearing his threat, and seeing his friend's agony, Wesley raised his hands, pleading, "Hey man, don't shoot, let's talk. Where are your car keys?" Syd demanded coldly. "Take me to where you parked." "No tricks, and you don't want to end up like him, do you?" he said, nodding towards the groaning man on the ground. "No, here." Wesley, jolted into action, quickly pulled out a car key from his pocket and pointed to a nearby vehicle. "That's my car." Boom, the sound of the facility gate opening echoed in the distance. Syd's expression changed. He grabbed the keys and pulled the researcher toward the car. They hadn't run far when gunfire sounded in the distance. "Ah!" the researcher beside him screamed. Chapter 7. Syd's complexion drastically changed, and he released the person and instantly performed a spatial transfer, leaving his original position. Spatial transfer experience +1. Bang, bang. The sound of bullets hitting the ground rang out, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. This was not a movie, TV drama, or patriotic resistance drama. If he were shot a few times, he would likely fall to the ground screaming in pain, completely incapacitated. Realizing this, he couldn't afford to waste his energy, and in an instant, he blinked away several times. Spatial Transfer Experience +1. Spatial Transfer Experience +1. Spatial Transfer Experience +1. Using the cover of night and the almost unnoticeable signs of spatial translocation, he successfully made it next to the car. Just as he used the remote to open the car door and sat down, a series of bullet sounds erupted near his ear. Bang, 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 accompanied by the sound of breaking car glass. Fuck. Syd clutched his left arm, unable to suppress a cry of pain. There was a bullet hole clearly visible on his arm, now bleeding profusely. His face turned pale with pain, almost fainting. He started the car and slammed on the accelerator, driving straight down the road. At the same time, he strained every bit of remaining energy in his body to form a rebound shield at the car window. Rebound Shield Experience +1. Whoosh, the sound of bullets piercing through the air. Then, an astonishing scene unfolded. The space around him slightly rippled, and the bullets seemed to be swallowed by the space, disappearing without a trace. At the same time, Syd felt a strange void where the metal bullets were rapidly disintegrating into nothing, and their kinetic energy absorbed by this space. These forces converged, forming a blue energy. At that moment, Syd had a premonition that he could reflect this energy whenever he wished. He did not release it immediately due to the car speeding away and his lack of focus for aiming. Now, his attention was wholly captured by the severe pain in his arm and the direction the vehicle was traveling, with no mind to spare for anything else. The car sped unrestrictedly forward. Damn it! Captain Kenny's face darkened as he watched the black vehicle disappear into the distance. No one had escaped the base for a long time, and it wouldn't happen on his watch. Thinking this, his anger flared. Chase him, we must catch that kid. By the time he issued the chase command, Syd was already far away. Glancing at the navigation system turned on in the car, he headed towards the nearest city. Sweat covered his forehead, and he looked somewhat dazed. Were it not for his strong desire to live, the lack of other vehicles on the road, and the original owner's incredible driving skills, he would have likely crashed by now. Isn't that kid afraid to die? Watching the rapidly moving vehicle in the distance, Kenny was shocked. Driving so fast, how dare he? Speed up, catch him! He ordered. The driving soldier sweated profusely, hastily explaining, "We can't, sir, it's too risky." Damn it! Kenny's expression shifted between anger and resignation, ultimately deciding not to push for more speed. Catching that despicable mutant was less important than his own life. Thus, at a preserved speed, they could only watch helplessly as the car vanished at the horizon, the gunfire having no effect. Kenny grimaced, "I'll catch you, don't think you're safe just because you escaped the base." What awaited that kid would be a warrant for his arrest and their relentless pursuit. He would be hunted down like a rat in the streets. He didn't believe that the kid who had embarrassed him could run far or hide for long, perhaps a day or two at most before being captured. Once caught, he was determined to teach that kid a lesson he wouldn't forget, letting him experience what true misery was. Thinking this, a smile spread across his face. After another stretch of pursuit near the city's slum area, they spotted a black vehicle in flames. As for the young man inside, he had already vanished without a trace. After searching for a while longer without finding the kid, Kenny drove back to the base, while others continued the search. Number 23 Research Base. Inside an office. What did you say? You let that test subject escape. Sitting in a chair, a middle-aged man dressed in a black and white suit, his hair neatly slicked back, frowned. Facing the base manager, Alessandro, Kenny forced a smile. "Sir, just give me some time, and I promise to bring back Experiment No. 37. Hearing his words, Alessandro's expression softened somewhat, saying, "I hope so." After that, he lost interest in Experiment No. 37, considering it just another ordinary test subject. He picked up a stack of freshly printed documents from his desk, casually browsing through them. They contained some information about Experiment No. 37, including an analysis of the abilities demonstrated not long ago. 2 new abilities were highlighted. Mutant abilities: the target is suspected to have telepathic abilities, capable of teleporting a short distance through thought. Can emit black energy spheres with significant destructive power, suspected of having a disintegrating effect, but the upper limits of destruction are unknown, requiring further testing. In a short time, the research base had recorded Syd's abilities. If not for the rebound shield's inconspicuous effect and the darkness of the night, Perhaps this ability would have appeared in the documents too. Reviewing the data, including the power of the mutant abilities and the range of telepathic movement, Alessandro felt somewhat disappointed and regretful. What a pity, it's just a failure after all. He shook his head. Experiment number 37, purportedly bred from the genes of two major mutants, Magneto and Professor X, had only such limited powers. Honestly, he was disappointed. Not to mention the initial capability of merely absorbing sunlight, which had been a major disappointment, leading them to almost abandon the research on him. Even now, despite the kid's second awakening of his powers, they were still not very impressive. A telepathic transmission that could only move a meter or two, what use was that, for passing through walls? And the strange black energy spheres, what use were they when their effects could be replicated by firearms, and the impact on a human was about the same? Just dispatch a few armed people, and they could easily kill such a power user. Chapter 8. Moreover, Alessandro had seen individuals with similar abilities whose effects far surpassed the kid's, making Syd's powers seem remarkably weak by comparison. It was only due to fortunate timing and the awakening of two new abilities, particularly the telepathic transmission, that they were caught off guard. Otherwise, had they known earlier, the kid wouldn't have even made it out of the base. With this thought, he shook his head. A look of disdain appeared on Alessandro's face as he muttered, "He's nowhere near Charles and Magneto, not even comparable to Subjects number 1 and number 5. He really is a waste." His expression then turned to one of awe, as if thinking of some perfect creation. Even now, he couldn't help but marvel at those two experimental subjects. Beside him, Captain Kenny also showed a mix of awe and a hint of fear. Superspeed regeneration, energy blasts, bodily metallic transformation, enhanced strength, heightened senses, pulse interference. These two were truly monsters among mutants. Thinking of the powers these two mutants possessed, he couldn't help but remark, compared to these two, that kid really is much weaker, not worth mentioning. These two are what you call true mutants, that kid doesn't even deserve the title. In a sense, the numbers also represented the ranking of strength, which clearly showed the kid's inferiority. That he managed to escape was merely good luck. Enough. Alessandro cut off the continued lamentation, speaking coldly, "The kid might not be important, but we can't just let him escape like this. After all, he's an experimental subject. It'd be a pity to let him go just like that, and it would tarnish the base's reputation. If he causes some destruction in society, that would be bad too. Catch him as soon as possible. If it proves difficult, send more people." "Yes." Captain Kenny nodded. As they spoke, within the confines of the 23rd experimental base, both ordinary and mutant prisoners were all whispering among themselves. "Did you hear what the guards said? My God! Did he really escape?" Suddenly, the faces of many prisoners were filled with envy and jealousy, especially a freckled young man whose expression was dazed. He couldn't believe that the person he had advised not to run or struggle had actually managed to escape. His feelings were a complex mix of reluctance and envy. In a nearby cell, several black men who had previously mocked Syd were now stunned, listening to the name of the escapee in disbelief. How could he possibly have escaped? "Dave, you said if that guy escaped, you would." "Stop it, I'm about to lose it. Why wasn't it me who escaped?" As they wallowed in resentment, envy, and jealousy, someone scoffed. "Humph, I bet that guy won't get far. He'll be caught and brought back to join us soon." "Right. Just like that, I bet that kid by tomorrow." While they were placing their bets, Syd was dodging and weaving, running towards a corner of a household's yard. Huff, huff. His face was pale, and his breathing was heavy, mixed with the sound of his weighty footsteps. The sky was dim, and the heavy rain poured down, weakening him further. Cautiously scanning the area to ensure he wasn't seen, he found a spot that was not easily visible yet illuminated by the moonlight and sat down. Feeling the numbness in his left arm and the drained energy within, he looked up at the moon obscured by clouds and couldn't help but give a bitter smile. It really is true, when it rains, it pours. Am I really going to fail? As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he started to run a high fever, faintly hearing footsteps approaching in the distance. Were the searchers coming? He tried to open his eyes with great effort but failed, ultimately slipping completely into unconsciousness. When he woke up again, it was already morning. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Feeling the stuffiness on his body, Syd was somewhat astonished and confused. Where am I? He looked around the room in confusion. The environment was cluttered, and the air was tinged with a sweaty odor. Pulling back the covers and seeing his wound had been treated and bandaged, Syd was surprised. As he began to suspect who might have helped him, he heard some movement in the house, and the homeowner knocked and entered the room. With the light turned on, he could see the visitor clearly. A burly and strong figure with a full beard, appearing somewhat rugged and handsome, likely a middle-aged man. "Who are you?" Syd asked, puzzled. "Did you save me?" He quickly checked his body and found no abnormalities. The documents hidden in his pocket were also intact, which slightly relieved him. The middle-aged strongman nodded. Looking at him lying on the bed, Chris spoke with a deep voice, "Kid, who are you, and why are people chasing you?" "What?" Caught off guard by the question, Syd's eyes flickered, unsure how to respond. "You're a mutant, right?" Syd's face showed a bit of strangeness. Seeming to anticipate his question, Chris explained, "Yesterday, those searching said a mutant criminal had fled nearby." He didn't finish his sentence, but both understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, Syd asked, puzzled, "Then why did you save me?" "Knowing I'm a mutant, and still." He was well aware of the local sentiment, for ordinary people, not detesting mutants was already fortunate. In severe cases, just a trip to the hospital, if a mutant identity was discovered, could lead to being reported and captured. The middle-aged strongman spoke gravely, "Because I am also a mutant." He stretched out his hands, which began to emit a red glow. Syd's eyes showed surprise. As he was taken aback, he didn't notice the profound look the middle-aged strongman gave him. His reasons for helping this kid were not as simple as he stated, not just because of their shared mutant identity. What he hadn't told the kid was that he had inadvertently seen the documents in his pocket while helping him. Naturally, he knew the kid's identity. Was he really a child with the genes of Magneto and Charles? So, this kid was also Magneto's son? As a mutant, he was quite familiar with these two figures. He had even been a member of Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants, only leaving due to certain circumstances. He pondered whether to inform Magneto about this. What would Magneto's reaction be if he knew he had a child? However, the young man's mutant abilities seemed weak, and his body was still. Chapter 9. Reflecting on the data, which showed that the kid only had the ability to absorb sunlight, he felt a sense of regret and sighed. Such an ability, lacking any auxiliary or combat effectiveness, might only increase the danger if the kid were to join the Brotherhood of Mutants. After all, places where mutants gather are always fraught with danger. He wondered how the kid had managed to escape with just the ability to absorb sunlight. This thought flickered through his mind only briefly before he dismissed it, concocting a series of plausible explanations instead. His focus returned to the young man's health report, and recalling the dire information therein, he sighed, looking at the youth with pity. He might as well treat the kid well while he was still alive. Clearly, he believed that Syd wouldn't live much longer. "The kid, what's your name?" "You can call me Chris," he said as he handed the boy a cup of water. "Thank you," Syd replied, pausing thoughtfully before saying, "You can call me Syd." Chris noticed a curious discrepancy. Wasn't the kid named Kevin according to the data? Thinking that the young man was probably hiding his identity, he looked meaningfully at him but didn't dwell on it. "Kevin is the name of the body, and Syd is the dude that got reincarnated. Do you know about your health condition?" Chris touched his forehead and handed him some medicine from the bedside table. "You're still running a fever. Here are some antipyretics and..." While expressing his thanks, Syd sighed internally. He was well aware of his bodily condition, still feeling dizzy, weak, and achy. Only the sunlight streaming through the window provided him some relief. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Maybe it was time to unlock some progress? Name, Syd Castell. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 22 days. Mutant abilities, mimicry, energy absorption. Current mimicry target, Orochi, title, Sun God, Will of the Earth, unlock progress 34%. Abilities, black particles, 6/100, level 1. Spatial transfer, 5/100, level 1. Rebound shield, 1/100, level 1, unlocked. Energy points, 398. Looking at his displayed remaining lifespan, he frowned, finally understanding why the middle-aged strongman looked at him that way. Only 22 days left. Syd furrowed his brow, confusion apparent in his eyes. Even considering yesterday's injuries and fever which greatly weakened him, it shouldn't have reduced his lifespan by so much. What did those damned people do to my body? He recalled several experiments, his expression turning grim. Noticing Chris had stepped out, he hurriedly pulled out his documents from his pocket and began to read them in the sunlight. Quickly, he found chilling information in the experimental reports. Those people had cultivated various cancer cells using his body tissues and then implanted them back into him, just to test whether his body would reject them and whether the mutant ability to absorb sunlight would affect the cancer cells. Besides implanting cancer cells, they had conducted other harmful experiments, although these hadn't had any side effects. At this moment, he felt a desperate urge to return to that research facility and reduce it to ashes, letting everyone experience despair. Syd was unsure of what to do. Clearly, the cancer cells were taking effect in his body. What to do? In his panic, his gaze shifted to the panel. No, I still have a chance. Looking at his various abilities, hope sparked in his eyes. If he continued to improve, there might be a power that could save his life. Thinking this, he hastily invested all his energy points into unlocking progress. The next second, the unlock progress surged from 34% to 39%. A pleasant notification sound chimed. Ability, Divine Finger, unlocked. This is. Guided by instinct, Syd lifted his right hand and pointed forward. Divine Finger experience +1. Ability, Divine Finger, 1/100, level 1. Looking at his uneventful finger, he had an idea and tried using Divine Finger again, this time aiming at a glass cup on his left palm. Divine Finger experience +1. Instantly, the space shattered like a mirror, a powerful force abruptly emerging. Bang! The glass cup exploded like rain, the shards propelled at astonishing speeds like bullets. Pft, pft, pft. The glass fragments embedded into the wall, creating a strikingly alarming sight. Hiss! While nursing a cut hand, Syd was shocked by the power of Divine Finger. Such force could shatter a ribcage and propel a person if aimed at their chest. And this is only level 1. Although the shattered space was only as big as a baby's fist, the damage was significant after all. Humans are fragile. I can now prevent others from getting too close. With spatial transfer for dodging attacks at critical moments and black particles for ranged attacks, now with Divine Finger to prevent close quarters combat, his sense of security greatly increased. As Syd was relishing this new ability, a sudden sound of the door opening and a loud voice followed. What happened? Upon opening the door, Chris first glanced at the young man to make sure he was unharmed, then quickly scanned the surroundings, shocked by what he saw. The white-painted wall was now embedded with a cluster of glass shards. How did you do this? He asked in surprise. Cough, cough. Syd coughed awkwardly, forcing an explanation. I was feeling pretty bad, thought of something upsetting, and I guess I smashed the cup against the wall, and then this happened. Sorry for the trouble, I'll clean it up later. Is that so? Chris didn't look convinced, his eyes flickering with suspicion. The glass embedded in the wall didn't seem like something that could be caused by just smashing a cup against it. Even if it were possible, how much strength would that require? Glancing at the young man's slender arms and then at his own muscular limbs, he expressed his doubt. With this in mind, he nodded superficially, indicating belief, and added, Kid, if you can stand, remember to come down for breakfast later. After speaking, he closed the door and went downstairs, then picked up the laptop on the table and began operating it. Looking at the displayed surveillance footage, he fell into a moment of hesitation. As a mutant, for his own safety, he naturally installed cameras around his home to prevent unexpected situations. He never thought he'd use the surveillance to invade the privacy of a young person. After a while, he couldn't resist his curiosity, paused the recording to generate the file from before, and clicked to start playback from when he had left the room. Chapter 10. The video soon showed the moment when Syd picked up the glass cup and made a strange gesture. Chris's eyes filled with confusion. The next second, he was stunned. On the screen, Syd pointed at the glass cup, and the space around it seemed to turn into glass itself before shattering explosively. The force of the impact instantly shattered the glass, sending shards flying towards the wall at astonishing speeds. What? Chris's face was covered in shock. Instantly, he linked this to mutant abilities. This kid's power is supposed to be absorbing sunlight, right? When did he get this strange and quite destructive new ability? The middle-aged strongman was amazed. Though it seemed that it had to be activated at close range, it was still a significant improvement over just absorbing sunlight. It finally differentiated him from normal humans, giving him the power to easily dispatch ordinary people. Unable to contain himself, he hurried back to the room, looking at the confused young man. He blurted out, "Kid, I thought your ability was to absorb sunlight. How come you have that move too?" He waved his hand to demonstrate. Syd, realizing what Chris meant, said in surprise, "How did you know?" "Sorry, I looked at the data in your pocket earlier." Chris then took out his laptop to show him, "And this? Surveillance?" Syd frowned slightly. Chris said awkwardly, "As a mutant, you know, I have to be cautious, so I installed some cameras." While speaking, he walked over to the monitor and turned it off, saying awkwardly, "There, now you don't have to worry about me seeing your privacy." "But you haven't answered me about your ability." Syd hesitated for a moment, then vaguely replied, "You said it yourself, as a mutant, I have to be cautious, so I hid some of my abilities." Hearing this, Chris's bearded face showed a look of realization. So he had hidden some of his abilities? Indeed, it made sense for a mutant to hide one of their powers if they had more than one. He looked at Syd approvingly and said, "Indeed, you did the right thing." Then, he commented with a smile, "Your ability to absorb sunlight is a bit weak, but this new one looks all right. It doesn't have much destructive power, but it's enough for self-defense." Compared to the destructive powers of stronger mutants, Syd's abilities could only be considered average, but Chris refrained from saying so directly and instead offered some comfort. After saying these things, he shook his head and walked out. Seeing him leave, Syd breathed a sigh of relief. Now that he was a bit calmer, he noticed changes in his own body. "My body's energy has grown a bit more, hey." Feeling that he could release about 16 black particles with the current energy in his body, a smile appeared on Syd's pale face. Suddenly, he noticed something, and the joy in his eyes intensified. He saw that as his body's energy increased, the lifespan number on the panel had unexpectedly jumped up by a day. Syd was surprised, then quickly realized why. Normally, his ability to absorb sunlight could speed up his body's recovery. Given his current dire physical state, it made sense to see such data changes. However, this also gave Syd a glimmer of hope. Could it be possible to live longer by increasing the light energy within his body? With that thought, he couldn't help himself. He got up from bed despite his weakness and walked to the window to pull open the curtains fully. The sunlight, previously just a bit, now illuminated his entire body. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Noticing the increase in energy points, Syd felt good. However, his happiness was short-lived as his expression suddenly changed. He looked out the window and saw several uniformed FBI agents knocking on doors from house to house, clearly not having given up on finding him. The brief moment of respite had almost made him forget he was still being pursued. If he were spotted, he likely wouldn't be able to escape. Syd quickly ducked down to avoid being seen, his expression becoming serious. With his current strength, escaping these agents would be very difficult. "It looks like I need to increase my power quickly." He thought for a moment and decided to focus first on improving his spatial transfer ability. The current environment isn't suitable for practicing anything else, so I'll start with this. He immediately began practicing spatial transfer. Spatial transfer experience +1. Spatial transfer experience +1. Spatial transfer experience +1. Spatial transfer experience +1. His figure flickered erratically around the room, appearing and disappearing in flashes that would have been frightening in the dead of night. As he used up half of his internal light energy, he paused and noticed a problem. If he kept practicing continuously, he would need to absorb sunlight to convert into internal energy for practice, which would slow down the collection of energy points on the panel. After all, the sunlight would first be used to replenish his body's energy, and with his internal energy depleted, he couldn't collect any light energy. That meant he had to choose between unlocking progress and increasing his power levels. Biting his lip, Syd decided that increasing power levels should be the priority during crucial times, with unlocking progress to come later. After all, he already had enough abilities for now. What was most important was increasing their levels, especially spatial transfer. As he continued practicing, time flew by. Spatial transfer experience +1. Spatial transfer experience +1. During this time, he also noticed that his internal energy was automatically recovering when he had enough food, which accelerated the speed of his ability level increase. Soon, it was noon. Under Syd's expectant gaze, the panel data fluctuated. A notification sounded. Ability, Spatial Transfer, 0/500, Level 2. Finally, Level 2. Syd eagerly felt the changes in himself. The most noticeable change was the increased distance of his spatial transfer. After testing, he found that the distance had increased from the paltry 2 meters to around 9 or 10 meters. Let's just round it to 10 meters. Syd was pleased. This improvement significantly enhanced his ability to escape. Despite only a few meters of difference, in this densely populated area, it would be difficult for those agents to catch him before he exhausted his energy. He glanced at the panel, caught in a happy dilemma. The difficulty of increasing levels had suddenly escalated, he wouldn't be able to continue improving spatial transfer within a day or two. After some thought, his gaze shifted to the black particles ability, his only ranged attack so far. If the level of black particles were increased, both the attack distance and the range of the particles would likely grow. I should be able to complete it by evening. Thinking this, Syd's gaze turned cold. When those people come looking, I'll show them a thing or two. He knew time was running short. To think those people would take a long time to find him would be underestimating them. And lately, he had seen them starting to enter people's homes to check. If this continued, they would eventually find this place, and then... Shaking his head, just as he was preparing to continue practicing, he suddenly noticed a change in his internal energy. Chapter 11. Perhaps it was not an illusion, but as his spatial transfer ability reached level 2, Syd noticed a significant enhancement in the quality of his internal energy. His body even began to thirstily absorb sunlight, clearly increasing its upper limit. With his internal energy now brimming, he could sustain the discharge of black particles about 27 to 28 times. It's still not much, but it's enough to support me in a full-force battle for a minute or two, Syd thought to himself. The enhancement in ability levels seemed to increase his energy too. It made sense adding a second-level ability surely boosted his internal energy, just as gaining a new ability had done before. Understanding this, he grew even more eager for the upcoming enhancement of his black particles in the evening. After scanning his surroundings and finding no suitable place to practice black particles, he pushed himself to go downstairs. On his way, he glanced at his left hand, now bandaged with white wraps, evidence of Chris's treatment of his gunshot wound. Internally thanking Chris and mentally awarding him a figurative good guy card, Syd made his way downstairs. Chris, sitting on the sofa watching TV, turned with a puzzled look and asked, "What are you doing down here, kid? It's not mealtime yet, and your wounds aren't healed, are they?" After a moment's thought and considering Chris's kindness, Syd decided to be honest. "Nothing much, just planning to practice my abilities a bit while I have time. As you know, I'm being hunted, I need to make every second count." Chris seemed to understand and didn't notice anything amiss. He stood up and suggested, "Come on, I'll take you to the basement." Surprised by the offer, Syd saw Chris smile and explain, "Don't look so shocked. As a mutant, I need to train too." Soon, they reached the spacious basement, which was well equipped with various training apparatuses and even had dummy targets. After a brief introduction and letting Syd use the space as he pleased, Chris nonchalantly returned upstairs. Once alone, Syd hesitated only briefly before pointing his right finger towards the ground. Black particles experience +1. Black particles experience +1. Instantly, streams of black particles surged towards the ground, creating a deep hole. As he repeatedly used black particles, his experience bar rapidly filled. When he had used up much of his internal energy, he used spatial transfer to return to his room upstairs unnoticed and began absorbing sunlight to replenish his energy. Then, he moved back to the basement to continue his practice. Ability, Black Particles, 81/100, Level 1. Time passed quickly, and because the basement was light-proof and he couldn't practice while absorbing sunlight, it was already 6 in the evening when the black particles finally advanced to Level 2. Looking at the now Level 2 black particles on the panel and feeling the changes in his body's energy, a smile appeared on Syd's face. Unable to resist, he tested his newly enhanced ability. Black particles experience +1. A black wave, larger than an egg, emerged and rushed towards the ground, devouring everything in its path and leaving a 15-meter deep hole. The range and distance of black particles have increased quite a bit. Though still somewhat weak, he was satisfied, knowing that the true strength of mutant abilities often didn't manifest until levels 3 through 5. Glancing at the now 500-point experience bar, Syd pondered. Now that spatial transfer and black particles are both at level 2, I can't enhance them further in a day or two. Rebound Shield and Divine Finger don't need upgrading right now. He then focused on unlocking progress. Unlock progress 39%. The next ability should be unlocked soon, either at 45% or 50%. Filled with anticipation, Syd wondered about his next potential abilities. Will it be Soul Pull, which extracts souls, or a Spirit Light Pillar, or even the terrifying Sunlight Strike? If it were the latter two, it would simply enhance his versatility in combat, useful against enemies with specific resistances. But if it were Sunlight Strike, known as a powerful finishing move in his arsenal, its effect could be devastating. At this rate, I'm eager to see if I'll gain flying abilities or mental powers. Considering the prowess of mental abilities in Marvel Comics, Syd was cautious yet hopeful. With mental powers, at least I could resist or detect mental attacks and anomalies. Without them, I'm blind to such threats. Now, without the need to practice abilities actively, his energy points naturally increased rapidly. Thinking this, his gaze turned to the hole-riddled floor, and he frowned. How am I going to explain this to Chris? Should I say giant earthworms did this? Hoping Chris wouldn't notice, Syd sighed, better go rest for now. The next second, he vanished from the basement, reappearing in the upstairs bedroom. Opening the door, he shouted downstairs, asking if there was any food. Just after shouting, his expression froze, realizing a mistake. Accustomed to using spatial transfer, he had forgotten he was supposed to be in the basement. How could he appear upstairs all of a sudden? Sure enough, the next second, he saw Chris coming upstairs, his eyes full of confusion. When did you come up? Chris asked. Syd awkwardly replied, while you were in the bathroom. Chris, touching his beard, though still puzzled, chose to believe him. After all, unless he had flown up, what other explanation could there be? Chris chuckled at the thought. Then, Syd joined him for a meal downstairs. After eating, Syd spoke seriously, I think it's time for me to leave. Chris looked grave at that. Kid, are you sure? With so many people out there looking for you. Syd nodded, it's because they're looking that I have to go. I don't want to cause trouble for you. He didn't want to risk exposing Chris or implicating him. If I'm found here, at the very least, you'd be charged with harboring a criminal, and in the worst case, it might expose your mutant identity and lead to your arrest. Believing Chris would understand, Syd added, I've been a burden long enough. We're not even related, so I can't keep staying here for free. Thanks for everything. Chris frowned, your wounds. I can manage enough to escape, Syd said, then turned and walked towards a door he had scoped out earlier. Watching him go, Chris considered whether to inform Magneto to rescue this potentially powerful young mutant, that was probably his son. After a moment, Chris decided to go check the basement first, wondering if Syd had left a mess. Upon entering, he was shocked by the sight of a very noticeable, deep hole in one corner. What is this? He exclaimed, puzzled and unable to comprehend how it was made. Unconsciously, his mind flashed with an image of Syd. What had the boy done? How? Outside, Syd cautiously looked around before running off. He figured the authorities must be closing in on his location. Indeed, they had narrowed down potential hiding spots, including Chris's house. Had he not left earlier, he and Chris might both be in custody. As Syd ran, an unmanned drone spotted him from the sky. Attention, suspected mutant suspect spotted. Team, take positions. As the surveillance team notified the standby team, the drone moved closer to confirm the identity. Syd noticed it and didn't hesitate to shoot it down with a black particle. Black particles experience +1. Boom! The drone crashed to the ground as Syd turned to flee into a shadowy alley. Meanwhile, an armed team of 10, led by the stern, muscular Captain George, was closing in, prepared with sniper support and ready to confront Syd at a safe distance. Remember, the target has the ability to absorb sunlight and launch black energy orbs. George continued briefing his team as they moved into position. Behind them, Chris, having just stepped out of the basement, saw the armed forces running and decided to follow, hoping to help Syd if possible. Watching from a distance, Syd realized escape was futile with his weakened condition and decided to confront his pursuers head-on. If they want to die, I'll oblige, he muttered, preparing for what might be a final showdown. Chapter 12. At this moment, a killing intent arose in Syd's heart. At the same time, he also considered whether it was too cruel to casually take a life. However, this thought was quickly dismissed. Those people were clearly coming for him with lethal intent, and if captured, the only thing awaiting him would be death. Since they were after his life, he had no intention of letting them off easily. Of course, he could run and hide for a while, but that was never his plan. Hiding would only work for so long before he was found. Only by causing significant losses to these people could he truly buy some time. Syd quickly weighed the pros and cons. Soon, his gaze hardened. Just as he had thought before, if those people wanted his life, they should not expect an easy time. The idea of defeating them and then letting them leave unharmed never crossed his mind. Letting them go back to recuperate and come after him again? Images of mutant behaviors involuntarily surfaced in Syd's mind. As he finished his contemplations and made his decision, the 10 armed personnel slowly approached. A deep voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, reached Syd's ears. "Mutant suspect Kevin, we know you're hiding nearby. Come out now, or we will attack." Captain George held the megaphone in his right hand, warning the mutant suspect named Kevin while vigilantly watching a house a few dozen meters away. Besides Syd and them, the residents hiding in nearby houses were also very nervous and afraid, worried about being affected by the battle. Of course, there were also those driven by curiosity and fearlessness. Some were peeking out of windows, some stood on balconies watching the scene, and some even had recording equipment ready to capture the scene for some sensational traffic. The residents whispered among themselves. Inside one of the small houses, a middle-aged man spoke with a little girl. "Mutant. Dad, what's going on?" "Quiet, the police are catching a bad guy." "Ah, so who will win, Dad?" "Well, that's easy to guess. The police will win for sure. No matter how powerful the mutants are, they can't beat the well-armed police, can they?" Not just this father and daughter, but everyone watching the scene felt similarly, believing that the mutant suspect wouldn't last long before being captured. Moreover, this wasn't the first time they had seen mutants being captured, and they had never seen a mutant win. The lighter cases ended with surrender and capture, while the severe cases could even result in death. Some prayed that the mutant wouldn't resist, as they didn't want any fatalities nearby. Others were excited and eager to see the police shoot the mutant suspect dead. In the distance, Chris sighed quietly. He thought, if there was a way to help, he might as well try to let the kid escape. In his view, it was doubtful the kid could win or even escape. After all, a mutant with only the ability to absorb sunlight and hand-to-hand combat skills, how could he compete against fully armed individuals? If it came down to it, any resistance would mean being shot from a distance. Seeing that the mutant suspect still hadn't come out, Captain George, dressed in black, frowned slightly, growing impatient and continued shouting. "Inside, mutant suspect, after our investigation, you've been found to have misused your powers causing fatalities. This is a serious offense. Come out and come back with us, we can still be lenient with you." Listening to the ongoing chatter, Syd's eyes were full of disbelief. Go back with them, to die? The words were pretty, but if he weren't a mutant and hadn't experienced those horrible things, just a regular person, maybe he would have believed them. Now, he believed that going back with them would save even the lawyer's fees, as he would simply vanish. These people still not moving closer. Looking at the distance of a few dozen meters between them, Syd frowned slightly. If it weren't for waiting for them to come closer, saving the energy used for spatial transfer, he would have been too lazy to talk nonsense with these people. After a long wait, seeing that talking was a waste as the mutant suspect still had no intention of coming out or even speaking a word, the 10 armed personnel's expressions turned cold. "If you don't come out, then we'll have to arrest you by force. Please do not resist, or you will bear the consequences." Captain George finally spoke, more for the nearby residents to hear, indicating that they had followed all procedural protocols. After warning, if the mutant suspect didn't come out and was accidentally killed, they couldn't be blamed. And this time, they had already received permission from above. If the mutant suspect resisted fiercely, accidentally killing him wouldn't cause any issues. "We're in position, expect to engage soon. Daisy, help lock onto the suspect's position," Captain George said into his headset. Meanwhile, his team members began to move. Some of them even put on thermal imaging equipment. The sun had already set, and the dimming light made it difficult to spot the suspect. Now, with thermal imaging, there was no way the mutant suspect could hide. They slowly surrounded the building, confidence evident on each face. They had received information about the mutant, even seen videos of him using his powers, and they couldn't imagine losing. As long as they maintained their distance, given the mutant's weak abilities, they didn't believe he had any chance to resist. They even worried about accidentally firing too many shots and killing the young man outright. So, at this moment, their faces were filled with confidence, feeling as though victory was already beckoning to them. After closing to within about 10 meters, they did not approach further. A muscular man named Brandon pulled a tear gas grenade from his belt and threw it near the house without a second thought. With the tear gas, they didn't believe the mutant suspect could continue to hide. Everyone tightly gripped their firearms, eyes fixated on every corner of the house, ready to shoot as soon as the suspect appeared. In the distance, Chris also tensed up, preparing to intervene. However, the outcome was somewhat unexpected. Noticing the incoming object, Syd frowned and instantly teleported away from his original position. In an instant, his figure appeared just a few meters away from Captain George and his men. Chapter 13. This close, even in the dim light, both sides could clearly see each other's faces. Syd Castell's face was filled with coldness, while the confidence on George and his team's faces vanished, replaced by shock and astonishment. What happened? How did the mutant suspect appear so close? Not just them, Chris, who was watching from a distance and about to intervene, was also stunned. His face, covered with a scruffy beard, was full of confusion, not understanding what had happened. Instantaneous movement? The kid had moved instantly in front of them? Does he have that ability? Chris exclaimed in surprise. He suddenly realized that he might have underestimated the kid. Not only was he surprised, but the watching residents and passers-by also covered their mouths in shock. At that moment, not good, there's been a mistake in the intelligence. Captain George quickly realized and was about to raise his gun to shoot. Unfortunately, before he could shoot, Syd flickered again to their side, then raised his right hand and pointed at them. Dark ripples emanated from his finger, shooting towards them at a rapid pace. Ah! Captain, save me! Oh God! They saw egg-sized black particles, 3 in a row, pass through 3 armed personnel who couldn't dodge in time. Black particle experience +1. Whether it was their black vests or clothes, nothing could stop it, they were instantly devoured and perforated. In an instant, they collapsed to the ground, clutching the pierced areas. Having a portion of their flesh and internal organs devoured by the black particles, even these tough men couldn't endure and began to wail in pain. Unless treated within a few minutes, they were certain to die. Compared to the previous finger-sized black particles, now, if the black particles hit an internal organ, death was almost certain. Using the faint light to look at the black particles shot out, both Chris and the watching residents were stunned. But while they were stunned, George and his team did not hesitate. They immediately scattered, and Captain George anxiously shouted, "Andy, Michael, Henry." Seeing them bleeding profusely on the ground in dire straits, he yelled angrily, "Vicious kid! Vicious, hey! Space transfer experience +1. Syd dodged the incoming bullets with another space transfer, calmly saying, "I'm just returning what you were planning to do to me." Seeing him dodge again, George temporarily stopped his team from shooting again. "Do you know what you're doing, attacking government personnel like this? What awaits you is..." "Captain, stop talking, kill this brat, avenge Andy. You're doomed, you disgusting freak, wait for the army to hunt you down." While Syd kept an eye on their movements, he was about to retort when a long-lost alert sounded in his ear. "In a corner you cannot see, a hidden hunter has taken aim at you, seemingly ready to strike you down, you." Space transfer experience +1. Without a second thought, Syd teleported away from his original position. Thud. A bullet deeply penetrated the ground. "Sniper, are there others?" Syd's heart chilled, and he looked around cautiously, teleporting again to be safe. After checking the face of the one who had been speaking, and seeing him surprised that Syd had managed to dodge, Syd didn't dare stay longer, not knowing when the hidden sniper might strike again. On his way, he stretched out his hand towards the one who seemed to be the captain. Black particle experience +1. However, to his surprise, the black particles were dodged by the captain with a sidestep. Clearly, black particles, just like bullets, could be dodged if one was prepared in advance. Even laser eyes could be dodged, and his black particles were even slower, making it normal to be dodged. My energy is running low. He frowned. After practicing with the black particles, because it was dark, he hadn't recovered much energy, and the level 2 black particles were consuming a lot of energy. Now he was barely holding on. With the sniper still around, he wasn't sure he could take these people down with the remaining energy. A misstep could cost him his life, and he wasn't about to risk it. He shot 3 more black particles at George and his men, then teleported away without looking back. Black particle experience +1. Black particle experience +1. Black particle experience +1. Screams of agony followed from behind. Thud, thud, bullets hit where he had been standing, including pistol and sniper rifle bullets. Syd didn't bother with those, feeling the energy for 4 more space transfers within him. He used 3 in quick succession, moving dozens of meters away to where they couldn't see him. Space transfer experience +1. Space transfer experience +1. Space transfer experience +1. Syd gasped for air, dragging his weakened body towards a dark alley. As he ran, he quickly reviewed the course of the battle and shook his head. The energy inside me is still too low. It's a good thing there were only about a dozen of them. If there had been 100, even if they just stood there and let me kill them, I probably couldn't finish them off, right? Without his powers, anyone could easily defeat him given his current battered state. In the end, it all came down to having too little energy. If he had more energy, he could have easily taken down these 10 people, even the sniper behind them. With that thought, his desire to enhance his strength grew even stronger. Just give me a little time. This thought echoed in his mind as he disappeared into the shadows of the dark alley. In the distance, George and his men did not pursue, and were currently dealing with the aftermath. Andy, Michael, wake up! The remaining 5 people constantly called out to the injured lying on the ground. Unfortunately, no matter how much they shouted, the responses from those pale-faced, blood-soaked teammates were very weak, some even fainting from shock. Seeing the dire state of his teammates, a murderous intent flashed in Captain George's eyes. That damn mutant freak! You wait, next time. Next time, there would definitely be more people rounding up that mutant freak, and he would surely be part of that manhunt. Captain George's face showed a determined look. At the same time, he also felt somewhat incredulous. Why was the intelligence wrong? The other 4 survivors, also full of doubt, shared Captain George's question. They simply couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. They were incredulous on this side, while many watching residents and Chris in the distance were stunned. Chapter 14. The residents began whispering among themselves. Dad, didn't you say that the police would definitely win? Well, it must be because that mutant is too powerful. Such a powerful mutant is indeed rare. But in the end, he still ran away. Didn't look that powerful, ha ha ha. The father quickly laughed it off to mask his embarrassment. Although what he said did make some sense, the power of the mutant had still left a deep impression on the girl's mind. Not just them, other residents also started discussing. We lost, hey? Those officers are too weak, they are just a waste of taxpayer money. Yet, really useless, where is all the taxpayers' money going? The recent events had shocked them deeply, their perception of powerful, armed officers being defeated by a single mutant. Even though the young mutant seemed to have been driven away in the end, it didn't change the fact of their defeat and heavy losses. In the crowd, a young man in a suit holding a camera was all lit up. Big news! A video of a mutant battling the police, this will definitely make waves online. Denham said excitedly. Especially since the police didn't win, it was even more sensational. He decided to edit the video a bit and then upload it online. He even thought of a title already. Mutant Youth Battles Police, Police Outmatched. Denham's eyes sparkled. As he prepared to upload the video, and the residents were shocked by the police's defeat and the youth's strength, Chris, among the crowd of onlookers, was also in shock. Earlier he had been worried, afraid that the kid might have died, but now he could hardly believe that the youth, who he thought only had the ability to absorb sunlight and engage in hand combat, actually possessed such strong abilities. Oh, now he understood everything. The basement before, and suddenly appearing upstairs. Chris pieced everything together in his mind, shocked. Energy comparable to armor-piercing rounds, and instantaneous movement. So, the kid really did fly up to the bedroom before. Chris couldn't help but laugh and cry. So this is the little bit of power the kid said he was hiding. He initially thought the kid was only hiding one ability, but it turned out he was hiding two more. Thinking back to how he had earlier praised the other party, thinking they were doing the right thing, Chris felt a bit embarrassed. However, speaking of which, the kid did have quite a variety of powers. Instantaneous movement, black energy, the previously revealed solar absorption, and that mirror-like ability. Did the kid have a total of 4 powers? 4 abilities, indeed not bad, although each isn't very strong, it's rare among mutants, Chris mused. While the others' abilities were still not as strong as those of powerful mutants, relying on 4 abilities gave him a decent combat capability, and overall utility was good. Did the kid just slip away because he couldn't use his powers anymore, or was he running out of stamina? Chris thoughtfully, drawing on his rich experience, sensed something amiss. It seems the kid's abilities weren't as convenient as he thought. Finally, Chris's bearded face broke into a smile. I wonder what Magneto would look like if he knew he had a son with decent abilities. And that Professor X. I remember those two are still at odds right now, really interesting. I'd love to see their faces when they find out, haha. As a former member of the Mutant Brotherhood, he naturally knew some things about the two, aware that they had once been very close friends, only to part ways later due to differing ideals. Professor X believed mutants could coexist peacefully with humans, whereas Magneto thought mutants were superior and that humans, who had always harmed mutants, should be eliminated. The two continued to fight for their respective ideals. Professor X's X-Men and Magneto's Brotherhood still often clashed. But, even now, when the two met, they could still talk like friends, each deeply trusting the other. Chris couldn't help but imagine the expressions on their faces once they knew the identity of the kid. As he fantasized, police sirens sounded in the distance, several police cars and ambulances gathered around. Captain George watched as his team members were loaded into ambulances, hate flashing in his eyes, as well as anger towards those who provided incorrect intelligence. He began organizing data, preparing to report the details of the battle and the intelligence error to the base chief, Alexander. At the same time, he planned to question Captain Kenny about why he provided incorrect intelligence that led to the death of 5 of his team members. That brat, clearly not as weak as the intelligence indicated. If it weren't for the faulty intel, they wouldn't have underestimated the enemy and suffered such losses. As he organized the reportable information, Syd Castell, who had fled into a dark alley, walked without knowing where to go. Leaving Chris's house, he only then remembered that he seemed to have nowhere to go. Not only did he not have a place to stay, but he also had no money. Memories of his foster family came back to him. No, I can't go back there. Syd shook his head. Maybe the moment he arrived, he'd be captured by the authorities. As he frowned and pondered, the sound of soft footsteps came from nearby. Who's there? He looked over. He was momentarily stunned at the sight. 3 disheveled black men holding sticks and other objects were looking at him with ill intent. What do you want? Syd frowned. Seeing that he noticed them, the 3 black men chuckled. What do we want, hee hee. They glanced at each other, a malicious gleam in their eyes. Kid, hand over your money and belongings, don't make us get rough. Don't think about resisting. The tall Eli smiled broadly, swinging his stick. The 3 looked at him menacingly, their eyes filled with scorn, not believing the skinny young man in front of them could do anything about it. Just this little arm and leg, they could handle him with one hand, haha. Syd had an expression of just as expected. At this point, he was too lazy to complain. Who knew walking through a dark alley could actually lead to encountering thugs? He had wondered where all those thugs for superheroes to fight came from. Turns out he was overthinking it. This place was a mix of prosperity and chaos. Thinking this, he coldly said, I have no money or possessions on me, I advise you to leave, otherwise. With his current fragile body, naturally, he was no match for the 3 tall, strong black men. To resist, he would have to use his powers. Eli and the others were startled, then all somewhat laughed, thinking the young man in front of them must be crazy to talk like that. Chapter 15. Damn it, then don't blame us. Eli cursed as he raised his club to strike Syd. Unfortunately, just as he raised his hand and before he could strike, Syd was already lifting his right hand. Divine Finger. Divine Finger experience +1. Along with the alert from Divine Finger, Syd's right hand was already pressed against Eli's chest. Crack, crack, the sound of shattering glass mixed with the crunch of breaking ribs. With a thud, Eli was sent flying 4 or 5 meters away, rolling on the ground and wailing in agony. Mutt, mutant. The remaining two were utterly shocked. This youth was a mutant? They looked at Syd with eyes full of fear. They could never have imagined that just stepping out to make a quick buck would turn into such a dire situation. Regret began to set in. They thought they could easily bully this young man for some money? He was a demon, a devil. Seeing the dreadful state of Eli from just one touch, they lost all desire to fight and turned to run. Unfortunately, before they could get far, the chilling voice of the devilish youth rang out. "Stop, hand over all the money you have, or else." Saying this, Syd glanced at the black man still lying on the ground wailing, and uttered a familiar line, "You don't want to end up like him, do you? Here, take it." Jamie and the other man were terrified, hurriedly pulling out all the money they had. Even more, they crouched next to Eli, helping him fish out some cash from his pockets. Having obtained the money and initially intending to let them go, Syd reconsidered due to his dwindling energy and let them take the injured man and leave. Looking at the couple $100 in his hand, he breathed a slight sigh of relief. "Good thing I had some energy left, otherwise." Syd shook his head. If those last two hadn't been so scared and dared to confront him, he might have really been in trouble. Thinking about this made Syd yearn even more for strength. "I'm still too weak, I have too little energy inside." After sighing, Syd, holding the dollars in his hand, planned to find some food and clothing. While he was struggling to survive and waiting for daylight, George was already driving towards laboratory number 23 to report the situation and question some matters. A few minutes later, he arrived at the laboratory and quickly went to the office of the base leader, Alessandro. "What did you say? That experiment number 37 has escaped again. All of you, more than 10 people, and you couldn't catch a mutant. Are you all useless?" Alessandro sat in his chair, hands clasped under his chin, staring sharply at Kenny and George. Captain George, hearing this, hurriedly defended, "It's not our fault." He glanced angrily at Kenny standing beside him. "Captain Kenny gave us incorrect information, which led to..." "What?" Kenny, a burly man like a tower, frowned. "What incorrect information?" George furrowed his brow and slowly explained what had happened. "What?" Captain Kenny's eyes widened in astonishment. "That kid was only supposed to be able to teleport a meter or two, and you're saying he can teleport nearly 10 meters? And that the range and power of those black energy orbs also didn't match the reports? That's impossible." He was incredulous. "But it is the truth," George said angrily. "Captain Kenny, it's all because of you." Enough, stop arguing." Alessandro was also surprised and halted their bickering. Seeing them look his way, his face showed a hint of interest. "It seems that number 37 has his own schemes, clever enough to hide." "Hide?" Kenny and George exchanged a look of astonishment. "Just like that kid had 2 abilities before, I think it's the same this time," Alessandro said with a slight smile, explaining thoughtfully, "Either that kid has made significant progress in developing his abilities recently, or he intentionally hid his strength earlier. I'm leaning towards him having hidden his strength before. After all, no one can improve so much suddenly, only hiding his strength explains it." He couldn't help but admire the young mutant's cunning. "So that's how it is." Kenny and George had a moment of realization, finding this explanation plausible. At that moment, George frowned. Then, "The capture of number 37 might be difficult moving forward. I really don't know if he still has hidden capabilities." "Don't worry." Alessandro smiled slightly, his calm demeanor reassuring. Being able to hide 2 abilities and some of his strength likely pushed him to his limit. The next operations should not face any surprises. Send more people this time, add some of the newly developed Sentinel robots, and carefully plan it out. We will definitely capture No. 37. He turned to Captain Kenny, instructing, "This time, you will go with George." Captain Kenny nodded, his face eager, clearly already keen to deal with number 37. Hearing this, George couldn't help but smile inwardly. He smirked to himself. Now that they had information on that kid, there was no way he could escape this time. Especially with the help of the Sentinel robots, he couldn't see how that kid could possibly get away. Thinking of his fallen teammates, his eyes were filled with hatred. As they planned their operation and had people collect more information about number 37, there was a stir online. As Denima uploaded the video to the internet, many people noticed this sensational video and began commenting after watching it. "Damn, are those officers useless, how could they lose? This mutant is so powerful, Not only can he teleport, but he can also launch those terrifying black things, totally unpredictable. Watching the video of the youth constantly teleporting and then casually firing black energy, nearly killing a person effortlessly, many viewers felt fear. Still, most agreed that, despite the young mutant's prowess, he would eventually be apprehended by the authorities. Video owner, we need a follow-up, I want to see the end of that youth. Exactly, we want to see the footage of that youth getting caught, I can't sleep well without seeing him captured. Let's guess, when will that young mutant get caught? As the public debated, anticipating the young mutant's imminent capture, some mutants also saw the video, their eyes flashing with surprise. Chapter 16. While watching, they were amazed. So many abilities this person has. Teleportation combined with that black energy attack, and the police couldn't handle him. He does seem quite capable. As mutants around the world watched the video in astonishment, inside the Xavier Institute, Scott walked into the room where Professor X was staying and showed him the video. Watching the young mutant's abilities on the screen, Professor X complimented, "This child's abilities have great potential." Cyclops Scott nodded in agreement beside him. Although the young man's abilities did not seem particularly outrageous, they included both support and attack, and with some training, he could potentially become much stronger, indeed showing potential. And in some special places, he could rely on his teleportation. If the accuracy of the black energy was better, its offensive capabilities could take down some enemies they couldn't handle. In his mind, he already began to imagine the boy joining the academy and assisting them in battle. Professor X, sharing his thoughts, said, "Scott, we could try to contact this child, see if we can recruit him into the school." Scott nodded, then he brought up another matter. "Professor, I still haven't found the person with the suspected Omega-level mutant abilities you asked me to locate." Professor X frowned upon hearing this, sighing, "Find him as soon as possible. Eric has been making some moves lately, and I suspect he's received some information. We must find that child before he does." Cyclops furrowed his brows at this, immediately suspecting Mystique. He suspected that Mystique had transformed into someone else and infiltrated the Xavier Institute, which is how the information could have leaked. They had no choice but to try to find him before Magneto's people did. He dared not think about the damage it would cause if a real Omega-level mutant joined the Brotherhood of Mutants. While he was preparing to act, someone in the Brotherhood of Mutants also noticed the video and showed it to Magneto. Watching the battle scenes in the video, Magneto became interested in the young man. Like Professor X, he too found the young man worth recruiting into the Brotherhood of Mutants. Raven. He turned to look at Raven, preparing to send her to find this young man and also try to locate the Omega-level mutant Professor X mentioned. Thinking of the Omega-level mutant Charles had mentioned, even Magneto couldn't help showing surprise and interest. He wondered, what kind of Omega-level mutant was Charles talking about? Even he and Charles were at most considered level 4 mutants. A level 5 mutant, especially an Omega-level mutant, intrigued him even more. His interest intensified. While both mutant factions were preparing to find people, Syd was frowning at a room. After leaving that dark alley, he had shifted locations, looking for a place to stay, which was where he was now. But the room looked dirtier and more disorderly than Chris's place, and there was a musty smell in the room. "Hey, man, this room is already pretty good. You can look elsewhere, but if you can find better than this." The white man next to him noticed his expression and hurriedly explained. Before he could finish, Syd nodded, agreeing to stay. Although he didn't want to live in such a rundown place, being wanted, he had to settle for these illegal accommodations. After confirming the price, Syd took out all the US dollars he had, asking the man to help buy some self-heating food and clothing. The man was initially reluctant, but hearing about the $30 in tips, he quickly smiled and agreed. After the man left, Syd sat on the hard bed, feeling his extremely tired body, and sighed. Panel. He opened the panel to look, focusing on the lifespan column. It starkly stated he had only 29 days left. My estimated lifespan has indeed increased. Syd's spirit lifted. Previously, when he gained an ability, his lifespan increased by a day, and now with 2 abilities upgraded to level 2, his lifespan had indeed increased again. Or perhaps, it was because the photonic energy in his body had changed, suppressing some of the diseases, which increased his lifespan. Even so, it meant that as long as he continued to improve, he might be able to live much longer. While Syd harbored hope in his heart, he also felt a bit greedy. If only I had self-healing abilities, then even if there were cancer cells, the healing factor could suppress them. Syd thought of Deadpool, who had originally been diagnosed with cancer but survived unscathed because of his healing factor. Of course, his cancer cells were not cured, and if the abilities were lost, his body would revert and continue to suffer from the disease. It could be said that Deadpool wasn't the original owner of that ability. If he had possessed it from the beginning, perhaps he wouldn't have developed cancer at all. Syd thought of Wolverine, who had lived for nearly 200 years, a true survivor. Shaking his head, he stopped thinking about the healing abilities and focused on the unlocking progress. Unlocking progress, 39%. Tomorrow, I should gain a new ability. Syd looked forward to the dawn. Some time later, the landlord Gary returned. After handing him the $30 tip, Syd began unpacking the self-heating food. After eating, he carefully locked the doors and windows, making sure no one could open them without making noise, and then settled down to sleep. Time passed. The moon set, and the sun rose. The blinding sunlight shone through the window, awakening the sleeping Syd. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Feeling the energy refilling his body, Syd's sense of security greatly increased. Unfortunately, he couldn't indulge in the feeling for long. He had to get up and leave quickly. He wasn't sure if the authorities could have located him overnight. Only by continuously changing locations could he avoid detection. After quickly eating, he didn't greet the landlord. Instead, he silently left the place. Syd, wearing a new set of clothes, a black hat, and a white mask, quickly navigated through the secluded streets. Along the way, he chose paths where the sunlight could reach him. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. After walking for nearly an hour, he finally slowed down. Chapter 17. Gazing at the abandoned hut in front of him, Syd walked straight in. He had just entered when he stopped. "Who are you and why are you here?" Two men and a woman emerged from a nearby room, their eyes filled with wariness. Syd assessed the trio. They looked to be in their 20s or 30s. The men's faces were covered with stubble, looking somewhat disheveled, while the woman looked slightly better, but not by much. Their clothes were tattered, making them look more like drifters than the owners of the house. Syd explained briefly, "I thought no one was here, so." Seeing his polite demeanor and that he didn't seem to be a threat, the three relaxed a bit. "We've claimed this place, please leave," said Mark, the slightly older and more composed of the three. Syd heard a hidden message in his words and asked, "So this isn't your house?" "We claimed it, so it's ours now," Mark frowned, annoyed at the young man's audacity. The other man and woman also seemed displeased, thinking Syd was being unreasonable as he still hadn't left despite seeing there were three of them. The younger man, a muscular blonde, said aggressively, "Leave now or we'll make you." At that moment, the hot-headed young man's body underwent a transformation that caught Syd's attention. His body suddenly enlarged significantly, his muscles bulging, making him look like a giant gorilla. "A mutant?" Syd's eyes flashed with intrigue. Before he could act, the other two quickly became anxious. "Kirill, are you all right?" "Calm down, Kirill." Breathing heavily, Kirill managed to calm himself down. "I'm fine, just got a bit too excited and lost control of my abilities." The other two sighed in relief and nodded. "What should we do about him?" Seeing Kirill's transformation, asked Heidi, the young woman with red hair, frowning. The three exchanged glances, malevolence flickering in their eyes. By then, Syd had almost figured out the situation. "So, 3 mutants hiding here. This should be easy to handle." He pondered the next move. Neither expelling them nor aggressive action seemed right, both would cause too much noise. He decided to subtly reveal his abilities and establish his identity as a fellow mutant. As the trio's cold expressions turned to quiet consultation, Mark signaled to proceed as they had planned. Just as they were about to collaborate silently to overpower Syd, a stunning scene unfolded. A black particle beam shot out from Syd's fingertips, striking the ground before them with incredible speed. Black particle experience +1. The sound of friction and cutting echoed as a hole the size of an egg appeared on the ground. The trio gasped in shock, cold sweat breaking out on their foreheads. Such power! If that had hit them instead of the ground! They couldn't help but imagine the outcome, a wave of fear overtaking them. This young man's abilities were terrifying, far more potent than any bullet. Recovering from their shock, and seeing the golden pupils revealed under the sunlight, Mark hesitantly asked, "Are you also a mutant?" Syd nodded. Though they had suspected, the confirmation made Mark and the others visibly relax. Realizing he was one of their own, their hostility greatly diminished. "My name is Mark. The big guy is Kirill, and the other is my sister," Mark introduced. "Hello, I'm Heidi," the red-haired woman said with an awkward smile. "You can call me Syd." The trio nodded. After exchanging names, the impulsive Kirill curiously asked, "Mate, how did you end up in a place like this?" Glancing around as if to emphasize the decrepitude of the location, Syd thought for a moment before asking in return, "What about you?" "We're running from the law," Kirill hesitated, then added, "You know, got reported after showing our powers, and then..." "It's similar for me," Syd casually replied. Hearing this, the three quickly imagined a series of scenarios, even guessing why he was there. They looked at him with sympathetic eyes. "Syd, was that your power just now? It looked really cool." Kirill asked with evident excitement. "It's quite powerful," Heidi commented from the side. Syd nodded vaguely, then curiously asked, "What about your powers? You saw Kirill's?" "I have X-ray vision," Mark shared, "and my sister." He gestured to Heidi to continue. "I have clairvoyance, I can see clearly up to a kilometer away," Heidi said with a modest smile. Before she could finish, Kirill excitedly added, "Hey, you wouldn't believe it, but their powers can combine. It's really cool." It's thanks to their abilities that we've been able to hide for so long. Of course, my keen senses also helped us too." As he rambled on, Syd thoughtfully murmured, "Combining powers, hey." He was familiar with this concept, having seen similar cases in past TV shows. For instance, a brother and sister, both with ordinary abilities, could join hands to unleash power capable of demolishing a building. Of course, such cooperation required a blood connection and compatible abilities. "These two combined can probably see anything within a kilometer clearly," Syd mused. After sharing their abilities, a certain trust was established. When Syd asked if he could stay the night, they hesitated but then agreed. During the process, Kirill even enthusiastically helped him settle in. After everything was set up, and seeing the trio discussing in the distance, Syd focused on his panel. Looking at the energy points that were now over 1,000 and still increasing, anticipation filled his eyes. This should be enough to awaken a new ability. "I wonder what it will be, I'm really curious." With these thoughts and filled with anticipation, Syd poured all his energy points into the unlocking progress. Chapter 18. The panel flickered, and a new progress display appeared. Unlocking progress, 47%. As the unlocking progress reached 47%, a notification chimed near Syd Castell's ear. "Ability, Psychic Light Column, unlocked." Syd gazed at the panel, feeling somewhat disappointed. Ability, Psychic Light Column, 0/100, Level 1. Psychic Light Column. To be honest, he was disappointed with this ability as it overlapped somewhat with the black particles, only being slightly more concealed. Syd remembered that the Psychic Light Column could suddenly emerge from the ground, akin to a laser beam appearing out of nowhere, catching people off guard. While it looked useful, it overlapped with the black particles. He needed more unique abilities, such as soul extraction or sunlight blessing. One could extract souls, and the other seemed like a full-screen range move and also a core technique. Unfortunately, he hadn't received either. Syd thought disappointedly, even levitation would have been nice. After his initial disappointment, Syd's focus returned to the unlocking progress. "I wonder if 50% will awaken a new ability, or maybe at 55% or 60%. Looking up at the dazzling sun, Syd was full of anticipation. Although the energy required for further unlocking was increasing, given his current rate of absorbing sunlight, he should be able to awaken another ability today. Glancing at the trio discussing things in the distance, Syd decided not to experiment with the psychic light column but instead explored more about the black particles. He recalled the time he fled from the research facility, using his last bit of energy to deploy an oversized reflective shield. What if I use more energy? Could I create a larger black particle? Curiosity drove him to experiment. Small blue particles appeared on his fingertips, then expanded into a dark ripple. Black particle experience +1. The black particles hovered over his hand, and he managed to prevent them from shooting out as he intensified his control. Syd attempted to increase the energy output. As the photonic energy within him diminished, the black particles indeed grew larger, But this consumes a lot. Syd reluctantly dissipated the black particles. He found it feasible, but somewhat not worth it. The energy cost was significant, and the enhancement was minimal. Compared to increasing power by expending more energy, it was more efficient to upgrade the ability level, which would be more cost-effective when deployed. Of course, in critical moments, it could still be useful, potentially being the last straw that breaks the camel's back, achieving a decisive effect. Discarding the idea of enhancing power by consuming more energy, he shifted his focus to reducing energy consumption. Can I still deploy a level 1 black particle? Syd wondered. The level 2 black particles consumed noticeably more energy than level 1, and sometimes, deploying level 2 was overkill, like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. He began another experiment. Black particles reappeared on his hand. Black particle experience +1. The egg-sized black particles expanded and contracted, occasionally distorting. After several attempts, Syd frowned. It wasn't impossible, but it was challenging, feeling like it would take a lot of practice to achieve. Right. He quickly realized. He had almost forgotten he was a mutant, and the black particles were a derivative of his mimic mutant ability. Mutant powers inherently represent instability and difficulty in control. Being able to deploy his powers so stably and at will was already an exception among exceptions. Other mutants might face intermittent efficacy or even lose control when emotionally agitated. Was I actually thinking about using my powers at will? Syd shook his head, then suddenly wondered, what if my powers also go out of control one day? The thought made him shiver. That would be terrifying. He couldn't even begin to imagine the consequences. Shaking his head, Syd cleared the thought of losing control from his mind. Feeling the photonic energy gradually replenishing inside him, he turned his attention to his other level 1 abilities. Divine Finger, Reflective Shield, Psychic Light Column. He contemplated whether to set aside some time to upgrade these 3 level 1 abilities to level 2. If he could upgrade all of them to level 2, his internal energy would increase significantly, and so would his combat effectiveness. However, choosing to upgrade ability levels would delay the unlocking progress. After pondering for a while, he decided on a compromise: spend the morning upgrading ability levels, and the afternoon gathering energy points for awakening the next ability. Syd focused on the Reflective Shield. Reflective Shield experience +1. Reflective Shield experience +1. Reflective Shield experience +1. Syd's internal energy rapidly depleted, while the sunlight continuously replenished it. Time flew by, and soon it was noon. Following a notification, Syd stopped his current activity. Ability, Reflective Shield, 0/500, Level 2. Reflective Shield experience +1. After experimenting, Syd was surprised to find that the reflective shield had expanded to cover his upper body. This meant he no longer had to worry about his upper body's safety. This is just level 2, what about level 3 or even covering my entire body at level 4? Syd grew excited at the thought. Besides the qualitative change in the reflective shield, his internal photonic energy had also increased significantly. If he were to deploy a level 1 black particle now, he could do so over 50 times. As for level 2 black particles, he could manage about 20 deployments, similar for other level 2 abilities. Just the thought made Syd feel that his energy was still insufficient, far from enough for his needs. Of course, if more abilities were unlocked in the future, his internal energy would undoubtedly increase, but for now, feeling his photonic energy gradually being replenished, he didn't continue practicing his abilities but instead started collecting energy points. Photon Energy +1. Photon Energy +1. Photon Energy +1. Photon Energy +1. As the sun gradually set, evening approached rapidly. Syd eagerly allocated all his energy points to the unlocking progress. The unlocking progress blurred. Unlocking progress, 69%. Watching the progress display, Syd was somewhat speechless. 6,000 energy points only increased it to 69%? He sighed, then focused on the potential new ability to awaken. Chapter 19. Ability, Soul Extraction, unlocked. This ability, well, it's alright. Lifting his right hand, Syd Castell seemed thoughtful. He had a feeling that if his target's spirit and soul were weak, he might be able to forcibly extract their soul. He was eager to try out this idea. However, there was no target available for him to try it on, which Syd regretted. Even soul extraction is available, floating flight and the sunlight illumination should be next, right? Syd was somewhat expectant. As he pondered, Kirill's voice carried over from afar. Hey Syd, come eat. Embarrassed by the call but penniless, Syd had no choice but to join him. After a meal that wasn't particularly delicious, Kirill discussed the watch shifts with him. Initially, Kirill was to watch the first half of the night, and the Mark siblings the latter half. With Syd's arrival, adjustments were necessary. However, perhaps due to distrust or some other reason, they didn't let him watch alone but paired him up with Kirill for the first half of the night. Time flew swiftly, and the night passed uneventfully under Syd's vigilance. The next morning, Syd woke up drowsy under the sun's rays. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. I wonder when those people will come looking. As he basked in the sun, this thought brought him worry. After having eliminated a few people, the ones sent next would definitely be tougher. Honestly, he wasn't completely sure he could handle what was coming. After a while, he shook his head. He could only take it one step at a time, trying to enhance his strength to face any upcoming attacks. Then he practiced his Divine Finger technique, aiming to upgrade all his level 1 abilities to level 2, to increase the energy within his body. With sufficient energy, he felt confident facing whatever came next. Divine Finger Experience +1. Divine Finger Experience +1. Divine Finger Experience +1. Ability, Divine Finger, 0/500, Level 2. By noon, Divine Finger smoothly advanced to Level 2. Syd found a secluded spot and unleashed Divine Finger on the concrete ground. Divine Finger Experience +1. With a bang, accompanied by the sound of shattering glass, a basketball-sized hole appeared on the ground. If this hits a person, Syd felt it was all right. Glancing at the remaining spiritual energy columns and soul extraction, he sensed some trouble. These two abilities, one would likely cause a big disturbance during practice, and the other lacked a target. He sighed and refocused on the unlocking progress. 70% or 80%. Suddenly, an intuition from his abilities suggested that sunlight illumination was about to emerge. Syd was startled but trusted his feeling. This feeling was special, similar to when he sensed the ability to mimic the Scarlet Witch previously. This time, his abilities gave him the same sensation. Thinking this, Syd couldn't help but look forward to it. Sunlight illumination, a core skill of Orochi, perhaps. It reached the Omega level. That meant, whoever possessed this ability would be an Omega level mutant. Far more powerful than any minor ability he had acquired before. At this moment, Syd was both excited and curious, eager to collect enough energy points and awaken this ability. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. In anticipation, the time reached 4 in the afternoon. Just as Syd was about to gather more energy points and then attempt to awaken sunlight illumination, an unexpected situation interrupted him. People are coming. Kirill stopped playing with his phone, his gaze intensifying as he looked into the distance. Noticing Syd's gaze, Mark explained. Kirill here has sharp senses, he can hear footsteps from afar. If he says someone is coming, they definitely are. Heidi nodded in agreement. At that moment, Kirill urged, you guys better see who it is. If it's the ones after us, we need to leave this place. Heidi and Mark nodded, then both stared out as if seeing through the walls to the outside. 5 people, 1 woman, 4 men, Mark's deep voice sounded. Looking at their direction, they're definitely heading here. Kirill was startled, his face full of surprise. Who are they, do you know them? After a pause, Mark hesitated, seems like they are from some underground mutant organization. Yesterday, this mutant underground organization approached Heidi and me, inviting us to join them, but I refused. Kirill and Syd realized. What do we do now, should we run? They are 5 people. Kirill said hesitantly. At this, Heidi and Mark also fell into doubt. Among the 3 of them, only Kirill had some fighting capability. Glancing at the young man nearby, Mark frowned. Even with Syd's addition, they only had 2 people capable of fighting, against 5 opponents. While numbers don't equate to strength, the fact that these 5 dared to come meant they were somewhat capable. With this thought, Mark became even more hesitant. After a while, they decided to wait and see what happens. A minute later, the group approached the house slowly, and from a distance, Syd also saw those 5. The woman was extremely slim, appearing to be in her 30s, dressed in a bright red outfit with red high heels, and had quite beautiful features. Her overall aura was immense, exuding a superior air, suggesting a significant status. As for the four men, ranging from tall and burly to short and thin, they all looked somewhat fierce. "Hello there," Carl Panna curled her red lips, looking interestedly at the four of them. "What are you doing here?" Mark stepped forward and spoke. Carl Panna smiled broadly, counter-questioning, "How did the discussion go about the matter we talked about before?" Mark hesitated a moment, then said, "Miss Carl Panna, sorry, we are not considering joining any factions at the moment." Carl Panna's eyes narrowed slightly, a mysterious glint flashing through them as she scanned the three, finally resting her gaze on Syd. "If you won't agree, then let it be." She smiled ambiguously, looking at Syd and saying, "You're called Kevin, right?" "This person?" Syd's brows furrowed. Chapter 20. It was just one sentence, but Syd could feel that the purpose of these people's visit was not simple, and it was very likely because of him. Otherwise, how could this person know the name Kevin? He didn't believe in such coincidences. At this moment, an indistinct sense of crisis enveloped him, making him feel like there were thorns on his back. Syd didn't care if he was overthinking or if his feelings were wrong. For the moment, he ignored the woman and looked directly at the panel. Energy points, 4,986. After glancing at the remaining energy points, he added them to the unlock progress without a second thought. The panel blurred, and new data appeared. Unlock progress, 79%. Only unlocked to 79%. Syd murmured. Before he could feel disappointed, a notification sounded. Ability, Sunlight Illumination, unlocked. Even Syd couldn't help but be taken aback, feeling a mysterious warm flow coursing through his body, subtly changing something. It was divine and enlightening. He suddenly felt like he had gained a new ability. That feeling was special, as if he could use that extraordinary power whenever he wanted. Syd knew, it was a power that could reduce everything to nothing. From this moment on, he truly possessed an Omega-level ability. Syd suddenly felt secure, his attention returning to the woman not far away. From the start of the encounter until now, only a few seconds had passed, and Carl Panna still thought it was because she had called out the name Kevin that the young man in front of her was dazed. Carl Panna smiled contentedly, heedless of others, and started introducing herself. Kevin, 16 years old, possesses a mutant ability to absorb sunlight, also has the abilities of instant teleportation and releasing black energy waves. Not long ago, he escaped from experiment base number 23. As if flaunting her power, Carl Panna spoke recklessly, seemingly fearless of angering the young man in front of her. Carl Panna smiled slightly, licked her lips softly, and whispered, "Am I right? This should be your information, haha." Carl Panna smiled sweetly, her eyes twinkling as she looked at the young man in front of her. As she wished, Syd smiled. Anyone would feel upset being investigated like this, especially when some personal details were revealed publicly. Kirill and the others, hearing this woman's words, couldn't help but flash looks of shock, surprisedly glancing at Syd beside them. Or should they say, Kevin? The three exchanged glances, seeing astonishment in each other's eyes. Absorbing sunlight, instant teleportation, black energy waves, did Syd really possess all these abilities? One person with 3 abilities? Their eyes reflected surprise and envy. They had never seen someone with 3 abilities. At this moment, Syd spoke, "So, what are you trying to say?" Carl Panna, twirling her golden hair and smiling, evaluated, "I think you're quite capable, worthy of joining our underground organization." Syd asked, "What if I refuse?" "Refuse?" Carl Panna was stunned, seemingly unable to believe his response. "Having obtained your detailed information should be enough to demonstrate our organization's strength, and you still refuse? Are you sure?" Watching his expression, Carl Panna's smile gradually disappeared, turning emotionless and somewhat frightening. Before she could say anything, one of the men accompanying her had already rebuked. "Do you know who you're talking to speak like that?" The man who stepped forward was named Hello, around 30 years old, ruggedly handsome and fierce-looking. At this moment, his face darkened, his tiger-like eyes glaring at Syd, as if ready to tear him apart, as if Syd had said something unforgivable. Beside him, a short and fierce-looking man sneered, quite bold. Then, he shook his head, looking down on Syd with disdain. "Refusing our organization's invitation, you really have no clue." Saying this, he scorned, we've seen mutants with your kind of abilities before, don't think you're so special that we must invite you. Suddenly, he smiled. Your instant teleportation is only level 2, right? I've seen someone like you, his instant teleportation was level 2. Your other abilities are probably also level 2, right? He looked at Syd with interest, then glanced around at the other 3 men, proudly saying, including me, even the weakest among us have level 2 abilities, and Carl Panna, she possesses level 3 abilities. Do you know what her ability is? Her ability is to control liquids. If she wants, she can make your blood flow backwards in your body and kill you instantly. Steven's face showed a playful expression, keenly watching Kirill and the others, seemingly anticipating the fear in their eyes. Hello and the other 2 also had a look of anticipation. As for Carl Panna, although still expressionless, her eyes twinkled with mirth, revealing her inner turmoil. Sure enough, the next second, Mark, Kirill, and Heidi all showed shock and fear in their eyes. They even stepped back several steps, clearly feeling threatened. Seeing the trio's reactions, Carl Panna and the others were very satisfied. However, the young man they were more concerned about did not show any signs of fear, remaining as calm as ever. This unsettled them. Aren't you afraid? Hello said in astonishment, don't you know that just a flick of Carl Panna's finger could end your life? Another man named Lap sneered, spreading his hands wide, dramatically describing, maybe you'll explode with a bang, and your flesh will scatter everywhere. Ha ha ha. Syd tilted his head, really? Carl Panna and the others were taken aback, their faces showing surprise, apparently not expecting him to respond like that. Carl Panna was slightly infuriated, about to make the young man experience the sensation of blood flowing backward. She hadn't considered that the young man might escape or fight back at all. Before coming here, she had prepared, bringing companions who could limit instant teleportation and others to protect her. She didn't believe that, with all this, the young man could still grow wings and fly away. But before she could act, she heard the young man's voice. Let everything return to nothing. It sounded indifferent, yet seemed like a lament. Short-lived life.
Thanks for listening.